Mom, voluntarily hand over control of this property, or you'll never see your grandchild again, my daughter-in-law said threateningly after learning I bought the $385,000 log cabin for retirement. She thought this old engineer was senile, weak, and easy to bully. But she didn't know she was messing with a systems security expert. After that blackmail letter, I quietly prepared a sonic trap to welcome her parents when they came to investigate. In the middle of the wild mountain night, a desperate scream rang out, "Help me drive away immediately." I'm grateful you're here. Before the story unfolds, leave a comment. For me, have you ever realized someone close to you wasn't who they seemed? Your experience could help another listener. A brief reminder, certain details have been adjusted to strengthen the message. The heart of this story about trust and standing firm is what I hope stays with you. My finger hovered over the green button on the laptop screen, 35 years of engineering condensed into one click that would either prove my geothermal system worked perfectly or expose catastrophic failure. March 2024, first morning in the Whitefish cabin with the keys finally permanently mine. At 62, freshly retired after 3.5 decades designing security systems that protected everything from data centers to power grids, I'd built my final project, a home no one could shut off, no one could control, no one could take away. I clicked. The laptop screen bloomed with data, temperature readings, flow rates, pressure differentials, cascading down the monitor in neat green columns. Beneath my feet, 300 feet of pipe, coiled through Montana bedrock, pulling the Earth's steady heat up through a closed loop I'd designed myself. No furnace, no electrical heating elements, no monthly utility bills to some corporation that could decide I'd missed a payment. Silent, efficient mine. The cabin's ambient temperature reading climbed 58 degrees, 61, 65. The system purred like a cat in sunlight, every sensor confirming what I'd calculated on paper 2 years ago during sleepless nights in my Denver apartment, planning my escape from a career that had taken everything and given back a pension and a gold-plated watch. 35 years, I whispered to the empty room. Every calculation, every failure, every late night, it all led here. The workshop area I'd carved out of the cabin's eastern wall held my technical dashboard, 3 monitors, a control tablet, sensors wired into every critical junction of the geothermal loop. Most people bought their retirement homes and called a contractor. I'd bought mine and spent 8 months turning it into a fortress of self-sufficiency. Purchase price $385,000 for a modest cabin on 40 acres of pine forest overlooking Whitefish Lake. But the engineering, I'd installed custom geothermal with redundant fail-safes, a solar array I designed for Montana's specific latitude graywater recycling systems that would make a NASA engineer jealous, pushed the real value over $770,000, double what anyone knew, double what appeared on any county assessor's records. I ran my hand along the temperature gauge, feeling the metal warm beneath my palm. This was mine, finally permanently mine. March bled into April. April softened into May. I developed routines the way I used to develop security protocols, precise, repeatable, reliable. Morning coffee on the porch at 6:15, watching mist rise off the lake like steam from a cooling server rack. Afternoons in the workshop, debugging the geothermal system's monitoring software, optimizing flow rates, documenting every sensor reading in spreadsheets that would have bored anyone else to tears. Evenings on the same porch with a book, I usually didn't finish listening to the forest settle into darkness. For the first time in 35 years, I had built something no one could take from me, or so I thought. Mabel Jenkins appeared on my porch the second week of May with a mason jar of huckleberry jam and the observant eyes of someone trained to notice what others missed. 65, silver-haired and sharp in the way that comes from 20 years as an Army nurse, the kind of woman who'd spent 2 decades triaging injuries in field hospitals and knew the difference between someone who said they were fine and someone who actually was. "You're the engineer who bought the Morrison place," she said, not a question. "I'm 1 mile south through the pines. Figured I'd introduce myself before summer tourists clog the roads." I invited her in, poured coffee, watched her gaze track across my workshop with professional assessment. "That's not a commercial geothermal system," she said, nodding toward the monitoring dashboard. "No, I designed it." "Impressive." She sipped her coffee, eyes still scanning. "Most people retire and buy a fishing boat. You built an engineering masterpiece." I felt the small, warm glow of recognition from someone who understood what they were looking at. It's what I know: systems, security, making things that don't fail. We talked for an hour, easy conversation between two women who'd spent careers solving problems other people didn't see until they became crises. Mabel told me about the local wildlife, the best trails, which roads became impassable in winter. I showed her the geothermal schematics, pleased to have someone who appreciated the elegance of a closed-loop system that required no external fuel. She stood to leave just as the afternoon light turned golden through the pines. "One thing," she said at the door, and her voice shifted into something more careful. "I've lived here 20 years. I know when something unusual is watching the ridge." I followed her gaze toward the tree line north of the cabin. "Deer elk. We're pretty remote up here." "Maybe." Her eyes stayed on the ridge. "But I've been trained to notice what others miss. Patterns. Movement that doesn't match the environment. I saw it twice last week, once at dawn, once at dusk. Same position on the ridge, same duration. Animals don't maintain surveillance patterns." The word surveillance landed between us like a stone in still water. "You think someone's watching the cabin?" "I think someone's watching something." She met my eyes. "Just keep your eyes open. Trust your systems, but trust your instincts too. If something feels wrong, it probably is." She left with a wave, walking back through the pines toward her own property with the steady gait of someone who'd learned to stay alert in places far more dangerous than Montana. I stood on the porch long after she disappeared, watching the ridge. The forest looked peaceful, innocent, exactly the sanctuary I'd paid $385,000 to build. Mabel said it like she was talking about deer, but 3 months later I understood she was talking about something else entirely, something that had already been watching me long before I ever clicked that green button and brought my perfect system to life. 3 weeks after Mabel's warning, my daughter-in-law Victoria arrived at the cabin with a hug so warm I almost didn't notice her eyes cataloging every visible asset. Victoria's father was Eugene Vance, 55, formerly a mid-level stockbroker at a Denver wealth management firm, claiming Julian had a client emergency and she desperately needed mountain air and quality time with Mom. I wanted to believe it. "This place is even more beautiful than the photos," she said, stepping onto the porch and scanning the view of Whitefish Lake with what looked like genuine appreciation. "You must be so proud of what you've built here." 35 years of planning," I said, unlocking the door. "It's exactly what I wanted for retirement." She followed me inside and I watched her gaze track across the open floor plan, the exposed beam ceiling, the technical workshop area I'd carved out of the eastern wall. Her attention snagged on the geothermal monitoring dashboard. "Mom, is that your heating system? Julian said you designed something custom, but I had no idea it would be this sophisticated." I felt the small, warm glow of recognition. Geothermal, closed-loop system pulling heat from 300 feet of bedrock. No furnace, no monthly utility bills. That must have cost a fortune to install. I did the engineering myself, just paid for materials and the drilling contractor. She moved closer to the dashboard, studying the sensor readouts with an attention that felt too focused. "Did you design the whole thing yourself? What's something like this even worth?" The question landed oddly, not the warm curiosity of family, but the sharp assessment of an appraiser. Between the cabin and the custom engineering, I'd estimate $770,000, I said. Maybe more if I sold to the right buyer. Something shifted in her expression, gone too fast to name. "That's incredible. You're sitting on serious equity here." We spent the afternoon walking the property, Victoria asking detailed questions about property lines, water rights, whether I'd had the land appraised recently. I answered pleased someone in the family showed interest in what I'd built. Ignoring the small voice that whispered her questions felt more like reconnaissance than conversation. That evening, as I prepared dinner, she appeared in the kitchen doorway holding Julian's iPad. "I almost forgot Julian sent this along for you. He said you mentioned wanting to try some new recipe apps." She smiled. "Would you mind if I use your network to install a couple for you? Mine's acting up and I need to download something for work." "Of course. Password's on the notepad by the router." I didn't think anything of it when she disappeared into the guest room for 20 minutes, iPad glowing in her hands. Didn't notice when she casually filmed me at the kitchen sink, distracted by a phone call from my financial advisor, leaving the water running longer than necessary while I scribbled notes about a stock dividend. "Got it," she called, emerging with the iPad. "All set. Thanks, Mom." She hugged me goodbye at the door the next morning, warm as a daughter. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I found the monitoring app she'd left running on my home network, an invisible passenger logging every device, every login, every financial transaction that touched my Wi-Fi. But I didn't know that yet. Not in early June when she drove away with a wave and a promise to bring Tommy up for a longer visit in July. I went back to my peaceful routines: morning coffee, afternoon system checks, evening reading on the porch. 3 weeks later, the registered letter arrived. I signed for it on a Thursday morning, recognizing the return address as a Denver law office I'd never heard of, Caldwell and Associates Attorneys at Law. My first thought was estate planning spam. My second thought died when I opened the envelope. R.E. Competency Assessment Proceedings Estate of Eleanor Whitfield. My hands went cold. To whom it may concern, this office represents the legal interests of minor child Tommy Whitfield in matters concerning his grandmother's estate management and fiduciary capacity. Recent evidence has come to our attention suggesting cognitive decline that poses material risk to estate preservation and, by extension, to the financial security of said minor child. Enclosed, please find video documentation demonstrating concerning lapses in judgment and memory. Colorado state law permits family members to petition for temporary conservatorship when an individual demonstrates inability to manage property or finances in a manner that protects dependent heirs. To avoid formal court proceedings, we propose voluntary transfer of temporary property management authority to your son Julian Whitfield and his spouse Victoria Whitfield, pending medical evaluation of your capacity to maintain fiduciary responsibilities. Please contact this office within 14 days to arrange document signing. Failure to respond will necessitate formal competency hearing before Flathead County District Court. My vision tunneled. I set the letter down, hands shaking, and opened the enclosed flash drive. The video showed me at my kitchen sink phone pressed to my ear, water running. The angle was perfect, capturing me staring out the window, nodding along to a conversation completely unaware the tap was still on. 30 seconds, 45. A full minute of water streaming into a sink that was already full overflow drain working overtime while I scribbled notes and talked about dividend payments oblivious. The timestamp read June 8, 2024, 6:47 p.m. Victoria's visit. I played it again, watching myself look confused, distracted, exactly like someone whose memory was failing. Watching manufactured evidence designed to make me look incompetent. They weren't asking for my property. They were threatening to take my grandson away unless I surrendered it voluntarily. They'd filmed me, spied on me, installed surveillance software in my own home, and now they were weaponizing my love for Tommy, a 2-year-old child who couldn't possibly understand he was being used as leverage in a property theft. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down, walked to my geothermal control panel, and started thinking like an engineer. 35 years designing security systems had taught me one foundational truth: every attack has a vulnerability. Every system, no matter how carefully planned, leaves traces. And whoever had orchestrated this, whether Victoria alone or someone behind her, had just made their first mistake. They'd shown me their hand before they understood who they were fighting. I opened my laptop before the fake legal letter even finished trembling in my hands. 35 years debugging security systems had taught me that attackers always leave digital trails. Victoria Vance, maiden name. I'd built a career finding vulnerabilities in complex systems by tracing connections others missed. Financial desperation didn't appear overnight. It grew from roots that could be excavated if you knew where to dig. I started with public records databases I'd used for vendor background checks during my security consulting years, typing her maiden name into property records, business filings, court documents. Vance, Colorado, Denver. 3 hours later, I had a family tree and a catastrophe. Victoria's father was Eugene Vance, 55, formerly a mid-level stockbroker at a Denver wealth management firm. His LinkedIn showed a respectable 20-year career managing retirement portfolios, his profile photo displaying the bland confidence of someone who'd never missed a mortgage payment. Past tense. The firm's website listed him as former associate, the professional euphemism for terminated. I found the reason buried in Colorado State Gaming Commission records. Eugene Vance had spent 8 months systematically destroying his retirement through online poker. Not the casual weekend game with friends over beer, but the algorithmic nightmare of internet gambling, where the house always wins and desperate men convince themselves the next hand will recover everything they've lost. $62,000 across 237 documented transactions, each one a small catastrophe that added up to total ruin. The timeline made me nauseous September through April. The same months, Victoria had started calling me more frequently, asking about my retirement plans, wondering if I'd considered simplifying my assets. I picked up my phone and called Julian, forcing my voice into the casual warmth of a mother checking in. "Hey, Mom." He sounded tired. "Everything okay up there?" "Beautiful as always. I'm just reviewing some financial planning documents and wanted to ask, how's the business doing lately? Any big expenses or financial pressures I should know about?" "Everything's normal. Revenue's steady. Clients are happy." "Why, just being thorough. You know how I am with systems and documentation." He laughed. "You sound like you're still at work. Mom, you're retired. You're allowed to relax." "Old habits." "Are you managing the accounting yourself these days, or?" "Everything's normal, Mom. You know Victoria keeps a tight leash on our business ledger. She manages the bookkeeping and legal compliance from her laptop while I stay out in the field running operations. I've never had a single reason to doubt her system." My hand tightened on the phone. "That's good. That's good that you're working as a team." We talked for another 5 minutes about Tommy's new words about the cabin's beautiful June weather, about nothing that mattered. I hung up and went back to the screen. My son didn't know he was already 90 days from losing everything, and his wife had made sure of that. I found the federal debt guarantee in Colorado business court filings, buried in the kind of legal language designed to obscure rather than clarify. Eugene Vance's gambling losses had triggered default on a business loan, something about a failed investment property, the details deliberately vague. But the guarantee was crystal clear. In the event of Eugene's default, the debt transferred to the guarantor. The guarantor was listed as Whitfield Consulting Solutions, LLC, Julian and Victoria's joint company, the one they'd formed 3 years ago when Julian left his corporate job to start his own engineering consultancy. Victoria had signed the guarantee. Her name, her authority as co-owner, her decision to tie Eugene's catastrophic losses to their business without telling Julian. The filing date was March 15, 2024. The same week I'd activated my geothermal system for the first time. I traced the payment schedule forward, calculating deadlines with the same precision I'd used to design fail-safe protocols. Eugene's first missed payment, April 30th. Grace period 30 days. Federal debt collection. Notice June 1st. Asset seizure authorization, 90 days from notice. 90 days from June 1st was August 29th. 90 days. That's all the time Victoria had before Eugene's federal debt guarantee would trigger asset seizure in Denver. Their business, their home equity, Julian's consulting contracts, everything they'd built. Everything my son had built while his wife secretly signed away his future to protect her father's gambling addiction. The conservatorship letter suddenly made perfect sense. Victoria didn't need permanent control of my property. She needed liquid assets fast enough to satisfy federal debt collectors before they seized everything in Colorado. My cabin, worth over $700,000 with its custom engineering, could be mortgaged, sold, or leveraged for exactly the kind of emergency capital that would stop a federal seizure. And if I refused, the letter had made that clear competency hearing, court-appointed evaluator fabricated video evidence of my declining capacity, legal fees that would drain my resources while Victoria's 90-day clock kept ticking. She'd built a perfect trap: surrender the property voluntarily or fight a legal battle I might win, but only after her deadline had passed and Julian lost everything anyway. Either way, she won. I sat back from the laptop, watching the cursor blink on a screen full of financial catastrophe. Victoria hadn't targeted my cabin out of greed. She'd targeted it out of desperation. Eugene's federal debt guarantee gave her exactly 90 days before everything in Denver would be seized. My son didn't know he was married to a woman counting down to financial collapse, and I'd just become her only lifeline, the emergency asset she could liquidate to save herself and her father. Mabel Jenkins knocked on my cabin door at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, holding her phone with 3 photographs that proved Victoria wasn't just attacking me legally, she'd sent someone to watch my every move. "I wasn't sure whether to show you these," Mabel said, stepping onto the porch. "Didn't want to alarm you if it turned out to be nothing, but it's not nothing." She swiped through the images. The first showed a man on the eastern ridge, perhaps 400 yards from my cabin, holding binoculars pointed directly at my kitchen window. The second captured a pickup truck, late model Ford dark blue, no visible license plates, parked on the forest access trail that ran parallel to my property line. The third showed the same figure in a different position, same binoculars, same focused attention on my home. "When did you take these?" "Monday morning, Wednesday morning. This one's from Friday." She met my eyes. Same pattern. He arrives around 6:30, stays until 8, then drives off down the service road. Never approaches your property directly, never makes contact, just watches. I studied the photos, zooming in on the figure. Male, probably mid-30s based on his build and movement, wearing hunting camouflage that would blend perfectly with Montana pine forest. He looked comfortable in the terrain, someone who knew how to move through wilderness without leaving obvious traces. Professional. Mabel nodded slowly. "In the Army, we called this a reconnaissance pattern. He's not random. He's not a curious neighbor. Someone hired him to document your routines when you're home, when you leave, what you do, who visits. Whoever's paying him isn't rushing. They're patient." Gavin Ross. I didn't know his name yet. That would come later through my own investigation, but looking at those photos, I understood exactly what Victoria had done. The conservatorship letter was her legal attack. This man was her eyes on the ground, mapping my vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect moment to document whatever evidence she needed next. "Have you seen him today?" "Not yet, but it's early." I handed back her phone. "Thank you for showing me and for documenting the pattern. You want me to call the sheriff? This is clearly harassment, maybe stalking." "What?" "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "Not yet. I need to understand who hired him first, and I need to make sure whoever's watching understands that surveillance works both ways." Mabel studied me with the same careful assessment she'd used when evaluating the geothermal system. "You have a plan." "I'm developing one." After she left, I stood on the porch for 10 minutes scanning the eastern ridge through my own binoculars. Empty. But empty didn't mean unobserved. Empty just meant he was better at hiding than I was at spotting. 35 years designing security systems. I knew what surveillance looked like. Someone wasn't just watching my cabin. They were mapping my routines, building a profile, waiting for an opportunity to manufacture the next piece of evidence in Victoria's conservatorship case. I walked inside and locked the door. My technical workshop occupied the entire eastern wall of the cabin, the wall facing the ridge where Gavin Ross had positioned himself. 3 monitors, control systems for the geothermal heating, solar array management, and the sonic wildlife deterrent network I'd installed to keep bears and elk from damaging my property. The sonic system had been an afterthought installed 6 months ago after a black bear destroyed my trash enclosure. 4 weatherproof speakers positioned at cardinal points around the cabin perimeter, each capable of emitting frequencies ranging from subsonic infrasound to ultrasonic ranges beyond human hearing. I'd calibrated them to 18 to 20 kilohertz, the high-frequency range that drove away bears, elk, and other large mammals, without disturbing the forest's natural ecosystem. But frequency was just a number in a spectrum, and I'd spent decades understanding how systems could be reprogrammed for purposes their original designers never imagined. I pulled up the sonic system's control interface and started calculating. Wild boars. Montana had populations of feral hogs in certain regions, introduced decades ago by hunters, and now thriving in the wilderness. Aggressive, territorial, unpredictable, especially when their feeding patterns were disrupted. And unlike bears or elk, wild boars responded to low-frequency infrasound in the 8 to 12 hertz range. Not repelled by it. I am attracted to it. The research papers I'd archived during the system's initial design spelled it out clearly. Certain infrasound frequencies mimicked the territorial calls boars used to establish dominance and locate food sources. Play those frequencies in the right location, and you didn't scatter wildlife, you summoned it. I reprogrammed the western speaker array. First, the units positioned 30 yards upwind from the cabin's main approach. Prevailing wind in this valley ran west to east, which meant sound and scent would carry directly toward anyone approaching from the forest access trail, exactly where Gavin Ross parked his truck. 18 to 20 kilohertz repel, 8 to 12 hertz attract. I changed one number and transformed a defensive barrier into an active weapon. The interface was elegant in its simplicity. Frequency range, duration, activation trigger. I could set it to motion sensors, manual activation, or scheduled timing. For now, I left it on manual control, one button on my phone, one click, and the forest would respond exactly as I designed it to respond. I finished the reprogramming in 6 hours, testing each speaker's output through spectrum analysis to ensure perfect calibration. The sonic system hummed silently, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. They'd sent a hunter to watch me, but the trap was officially set. I was about to show them what the mountains could do when properly motivated. The silver luxury sedan appeared on my mountain road at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, exactly 2 days after I'd programmed the sonic trap, and I watched from my kitchen window, with my finger hovering over the activation button. Eugene Vance behind the wheel. I recognized him from the photos I'd found online. Beside him, his wife Patricia. 53 blonde highlights catching the fading sunlight, already gesturing with visible irritation at the gravel driveway in pine forest, like someone who'd been complaining since Denver. The sedan rolled into my clearing slowly, completely unsuited for mountain terrain. Low clearance, city tires, probably worth more than Eugene's remaining retirement savings. They didn't know I was home. They hadn't called ahead. This was reconnaissance disguised as a surprise visit. Victoria's parents, checking on her investment, documenting the property, maybe filming more evidence of my declining capacity while pretending to drop by with friendly concern. I watched Eugene park 30 yards from my front door, watched Patricia open her door and step out, wrinkling her nose at the pine smell, already pulling out her phone. 30 yards upwind, prevailing westerly, dusk foraging patterns, everything exactly as calculated. I clicked the activation button. The sonic speakers emitted nothing I could hear. The 8 to 12 hertz infrasound frequency operated below human perception, a silent summons that traveled through the forest like a dinner bell only certain animals could recognize. I'd positioned the speakers to broadcast westward directly into the densest section of forest, where wild boars typically forage during evening hours. 90 seconds. That's how long it took for the first boar to emerge from the tree line. Massive, easily 250 pounds, with the distinctive ridge of bristled fur along its spine and tusks that caught the last rays of sunlight. It paused at the forest edge, head swiveling toward the infrasound source, then moved forward with the confident aggression of an animal responding to what sounded like territorial challenge. Patricia saw it first. Her scream carried clearly through my closed windows. Eugene. She scrambled back into the sedan, slamming the door just as 3 more boars emerged behind the first. then 5, then 8. Within 2 minutes, a herd of 10 wild boars had surrounded Eugene's luxury sedan, drawn by the precise frequency I'd engineered to sound like opportunity. Eugene gunned the engine. The lead boar didn't flinch. It charged the front bumper with the full weight of territorial rage, denting the chrome with an impact I could hear from my kitchen window. Another boar attacked the driver's side door tusks, scraping paint hooves, hammering the panel until it buckled inward. Patricia's screaming never stopped. Even muffled through car windows and distance, I could hear her panic. "Get us out, Eugene! Get out now!" But getting out meant reversing down a narrow mountain road in near darkness with wild boars pursuing. Eugene tried twice. Both times the boars charged harder and he slammed on the brakes rather than risk hitting one and destroying his undercarriage on 400 pounds of enraged animal. 6 hours. I watched them sit there while the sun set completely and the boars settled into aggressive patrol patterns around the sedan, occasionally charging when Eugene tested the engine. I deactivated the sonic system after the first hour, but the damage was done. The boars had claimed the territory and they weren't leaving until they were satisfied the threat had passed. At 12:47 a.m., Eugene finally made his move. Headlights blazing, he reversed at dangerous speed down the mountain road in complete darkness, boars chasing for the first 100 yards before giving up and returning to the forest. I watched their taillights disappear down the mountain and allowed myself exactly 4 seconds of satisfaction, because I knew what was coming next. The call arrived at 8 a.m. the next morning. No warm greeting, no pretense. "You thought you were clever, didn't you?" Victoria's voice carried cold satisfaction. "My parents filed a lawsuit this morning with Flathead County. Sonic weapon, reckless endangerment of citizens. We have dashcam footage from their car showing exactly when your system activated and when the boars appeared. 90 seconds. That's not coincidence, Eleanor. That's weaponized engineering." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "Your parents trespassed on private property without invitation, or they were visiting family. You attacked them with a deliberately activated sonic device that summoned dangerous wildlife, causing 6 hours of trauma and over $8,000 in vehicle damage. The front bumper is destroyed. Both left doors are dented beyond repair. Patricia's still under sedation from the panic attack." I closed my eyes. The damage. I'd watched it happen but hadn't calculated how it would look through Victoria's lens. Not a defensive measure against surveillance, but an unprovoked attack against elderly visitors by a woman with access to sophisticated technology. She clearly didn't understand how to control safely. "You've handed us exactly what we needed," Victoria continued. "Evidence of reckless behavior, inability to manage complex systems safely, danger to family members. The conservatorship petition just got a lot stronger." Conservatorship. There was the word I'd been avoiding. Not just property theft, legal control, court-ordered authority over my finances, my decisions my entire life granted to family members who could prove I posed a danger to myself or others. "This is about your father's gambling debts," I said quietly. "I know about the $62,000. I know about the federal debt guarantee you signed using Julian's company. I know you have 90 days before—" "I have no idea what you're talking about." Her voice didn't waver. "What I know is that you attacked my parents with a sonic weapon, and now you're spinning conspiracy theories, which frankly makes the conservatorship case even easier." She paused, and I heard the shift in her tone, the real weapon coming. "By the way, how's little Tommy doing? I was just telling him this morning that Grandma might not be able to visit for a while. He was so sad. But you understand we have to protect him from anyone who might pose a risk." The line went dead. I sat at my kitchen table for 20 minutes, coffee going cold, watching the eastern ridge, where Gavin Ross had been watching me. Victoria had turned my small victory into her legal weapon. The dashcam footage proved I'd used a sonic device that summoned aggressive wildlife, causing real damage and real trauma. The conservatorship petition would cite it as evidence of dangerous behavior, inability to manage technology, threat to family safety. But the lawsuit wasn't the real threat. The real threat was her final sentence about Tommy. Grandma might not be able to visit for a while. She was using my grandson as leverage, betting I'd surrender everything to keep him in my life. I had underestimated her intelligence. That was my first and last mistake. I was in my truck heading down the mountain toward Whitefish before Victoria's threat about Tommy had even finished echoing in my head. 35 years solving engineering problems had taught me that when you don't understand the weapon being used against you, you find an expert who does. Keith Ashford's law office occupied the second floor of a brick building on Main Street, above a coffee shop that made the stairwell smell like roasted beans and possibility. He met me in the conference room at 10 a.m., 45 years old, with the direct manner of someone who cut through legal complexity for a living. "Start from the beginning," he said, opening a yellow legal pad. "Everything." I laid it out like debugging code, systematic, chronological, leaving nothing out. The fake legal letter, threatening conservatorship, Victoria's June visit where she installed spyware and filmed me leaving water running, Eugene's gambling catastrophe and the federal debt guarantee Victoria had signed without Julian's knowledge, Mabel's surveillance photos showing Gavin Ross watching my cabin on a scheduled pattern, the sonic wildlife system I'd reprogrammed to summon wild boars, Eugene and Patricia's 6-hour siege in their luxury sedan, Victoria's counter-lawsuit claiming I'd used a sonic weapon to endanger citizens, the dashcam footage, the threat to cut me off from Tommy. Ashford took notes without interrupting his pen, moving in efficient shorthand across the page. "Conservatorship," he said when I finished. "That's the word Victoria's working toward, even though her fake letter didn't use it explicitly. It's a legal process where courts declare someone incompetent to manage their own affairs, finances, property, sometimes even medical decisions. Family members can petition claiming the person needs supervision to protect themselves or their assets." The word landed like a diagnosis. Incompetent, legally incapacitated, unable to exercise sound judgment. The standard varies by state, but Montana courts look for evidence of declining mental capacity, inability to manage property safely, or behavior that poses risk to self or others. He tapped his pen against the pad. "Your wild boar incident. That's exactly the kind of evidence they'll use. Sophisticated engineering weaponized against family members. Reckless. Dangerous. Proof you can't be trusted with complex systems." But the fake letter was a test. Ashford leaned forward. "They're gauging your response before filing the real petition. Seeing if you'll panic, make mistakes, give them more ammunition. The fact that you responded by attacking Eugene's parents with wildlife. From their perspective, you just confirmed everything they needed to prove." I felt the trap closing retroactively. "So everything I did made their case stronger. I'm sorry, but that's the reality. They provoked you, you reacted defensively, and now they have documented evidence of dangerous behavior." He paused. "But here's what they don't know: you came to me before they filed the real petition. That gives us time to build a defense." "What kind of defense?" Ashford flipped to a fresh page. 3 parts. First, living trust. You transfer your assets into an irrevocable trust, naming Julian as trustee. Even if they win conservatorship over your person, they can't touch trust assets. It's legal protection that survives their attack. I thought of my cabin, the engineering I'd poured into it. That means giving up control. It means protecting what you've built from people who want to liquidate it. Julian's your son. Do you trust him? "More than I trust his wife." "Then we structure it so he's trustee, but Victoria has no authority. Clean separation." Ashford made a note. "Second, independent medical certification, 3-state evaluation by board-certified specialists proving you're cognitively sound, mentally competent, capable of managing complex systems. When they file their conservatorship petition with fake evidence of decline, we counter with medical proof of competency. I'd spent 40 years protecting systems from external threats. I'd never imagined the threat could come from inside the family itself." Third, Ashford continued, "comprehensive documentation. Everything you've told me today, we create a timeline with evidence. Eugene's gambling records, the spyware Victoria installed, the surveillance photos, the fake legal letter. We build a paper trail showing this isn't about protecting you, it's about exploiting you to cover someone else's debts. Will that be enough? He met my eyes. Conservatorship cases are hard to defend because courts err on the side of protection. If there's any evidence of declining capacity, judges often grant it temporarily while ordering evaluation. The problem is, once you're under conservatorship, everything you do gets interpreted through that lens. You protest. That's agitation. Proof of confusion. You hire lawyers. That's paranoia. Evidence of instability. The system becomes a cage where normal behavior looks like symptoms. So even if I'm completely competent, the petition itself damages your credibility. That's why we need the medical certification now before they file. Preemptive proof that when they claim you're declining, it's a lie. I looked out the conference room window at Main Street whitefish tourists walking past with ice cream cones and hiking gear, living lives where family meant safety instead of threat. There's something else, Ashford said quietly. Conservatorship isn't just about your money. If they win full conservatorship, they control medical decisions, living arrangements, who you can see. They could move you to a facility, restrict your communications, isolate you from anyone who might help you fight back. It's not just your property at stake, it's your autonomy. He said conservatorship like it was a legal term. To me, it sounded like a cage. How long do we have? If the fake letter was their test run, I'd estimate 30 to 60 days before they file the real petition. Maybe less if they're working against Eugene's 90-day debt deadline. He closed his legal pad. We need to move fast. Living trust drafted this week. Medical evaluation scheduled immediately. And we need to understand exactly who we're fighting, not just Victoria, but everyone helping her. I stood feeling the weight of what I'd learned. Victoria wasn't just attacking my property. She was attacking my competence, my autonomy, my right to control my own life. The word conservatorship sounded sterile and professional, but what it meant was that if she won, I would lose everything, including the right to make decisions about my own existence. The Flathead County Courthouse smelled like old paper and institutional coffee, and I sat at a metal desk under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects, while Keith Ashford pulled filing drawers looking for the financial records that would tell me exactly who I was fighting. Kalispell, Montana. 2 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. The public records room occupied the basement level, staffed by a clerk who looked like she'd been filing documents since the county was founded. Keith had explained during the drive that financial records court filings and business registrations were all public. You just had to know where to look and what patterns mattered. He started with Eugene Vance's name, pulling every document filed in the past 2 years. Gambling debt timeline confirmed. 8 months of escalating online poker losses, starting small in September and accelerating through winter until the final catastrophic loss in April. The federal debt collection notice showed the exact figure I'd found in my own research, $62,000, and the guarantee document that made my stomach turn. Here, Keith said, sliding the paper across the desk. Federal debt guarantee, signed March 15, 2024. Guarantor listed as Whitfield Consulting Solutions, LLC. Victoria's signature using her authority as co-owner. I stared at my son's company name tied to a debt he knew nothing about. She signed this without telling Julian, which means when Eugene defaulted, the debt legally transferred to their business. Your son became liable for his father-in-law's gambling losses the moment Victoria put pen to paper. Keith made notes on his legal pad, but here's what concerns me more. He pulled another file from a different drawer, Colorado business records, cross-referenced through interstate databases. Tristan Vance, Keith said, reading from the screen. Victoria's brother, 32 years old, ran an insurance brokerage in Denver from 2019 to 2021. Colorado Department of Insurance opened a fraud investigation in May 2021, suspicious claim patterns, falsified medical records, suspected collusion with medical providers to inflate disability payments. What happened? Investigation suspended in November 2021 due to insufficient evidence. Key witness recanted testimony. Documents disappeared from the insurance company's records. Keith met my eyes. Suspended doesn't mean innocent. It means they couldn't prove it in court. The pieces assembled themselves with the precision of a circuit diagram. Victoria's family didn't just have financial problems, they had a documented history of insurance fraud. Tristan had operated a brokerage sophisticated enough to require multi-agency investigation. And when that investigation threatened him, evidence conveniently vanished. "Your daughter-in-law's family has a history with insurance fraud," Keith said quietly. "This isn't their first time exploiting legal systems. They're experienced." I thought about Victoria's visit to my cabin, the careful questions about property value, the way she'd filmed me with strategic precision, the fake legal letter that arrived exactly 3 weeks later testing my response before filing the real petition. "She didn't marry Julian by accident," I said. "She married into a stable business she could exploit when her family needed emergency capital." Keith nodded. "And when that wasn't enough, she turned to the next available asset, you." I drove home with 40 pages of printed records documenting Eugene's gambling catastrophe and Tristan's fraud investigation, and the growing certainty that I was not dealing with a desperate family making panicked mistakes. I was dealing with professionals who knew how insurance fraud worked, how legal systems could be manipulated, how to make evidence disappear when investigations got too close. That night at 9 p.m., I called Julian from my cabin kitchen, forcing my voice into casual warmth. "Hey, honey, just checking in. How's work going?" "Busy. Good busy." He sounded tired but content. "We just signed 3 new clients this week. Revenue's up 20% from last quarter." "That's wonderful. Any big expenses coming up, anything I should know about on the business side?" "Everything's normal, Mom." The phrase hit me like cold water. She's really good with that stuff. Victoria's exact words from her June visit when I'd asked who managed their accounting. "And you're comfortable with that arrangement?" I kept my voice neutral. "Not seeing the books yourself. I trust her completely. She studied finance in college, worked in wealth management before we got married. She knows what she's doing way better than I ever could." Every sentence sounded rehearsed, not because Julian was lying, but because Victoria had constructed the framework of his understanding so carefully that he repeated her assessments as his own conclusions. Information isolation, financial opacity, complete delegation of oversight to the person actively exploiting him. "How's Tommy doing?" I asked, changing subjects before my voice could betray what I knew. "Amazing. He's starting to put 2-word sentences together. Data home. Want juice? Victoria says he's ahead of the development curve. Can I visit next month? I'd love to see him." A pause. "Let me check with Victoria about her schedule. She's been really stressed lately with some family stuff. I'll text you." Family stuff. Eugene's gambling debts and the 90-day deadline that was ticking down toward asset seizure. But Julian didn't know that. He knew only what Victoria told him, which was nothing except carefully crafted excuses about being stressed. "Sure, honey, whenever works. Give Tommy a hug from Grandma." After I hung up, I sat in the dark kitchen listening to the geothermal system's quiet hum. My son had said he trusted Victoria completely. He'd used her exact phrases to explain why he didn't need to see financial records. He'd asked her permission before letting his own mother visit. I knew the truth. Eugene's debts, Tristan's fraud history, the federal guarantee that made Julian liable, the conservatorship scheme designed to liquidate my assets before September's deadline. But telling Julian now, without undeniable proof, without documentation, he couldn't dismiss as misunderstanding, would only warn Victoria. She'd explain it away. Spin it as family helping family, or investments gone wrong, or my declining memory creating conspiracy theories. And then she'd accelerate her timeline, filing the conservatorship petition immediately instead of waiting. The most painful part of protecting my son was letting him stay blind until I could show him evidence he couldn't deny. My son asked how I was doing. I lied and said I was fine. How do you tell someone the person they love is systematically destroying their life? I signed the first page of 47 at 9:32 a.m. on a Tuesday in early August, transferring every asset I'd spent 35 years building into a legal structure Victoria could never touch, or so I believed. Keith Ashford's conference room smelled like fresh printer ink and leather furniture polish. Rebecca Morgan, the notary assistant, had arranged the trust documents across the mahogany table with practiced efficiency, each page flagged with a colored tab marking where my signature was required. Page 1, Declaration of Trust. I, Eleanor Whitfield, hereby establish this trust for the management and distribution of my assets. Page 3 through 7, Asset Schedule. The Whitefish Cabin and 40 acres appraised value $770,000. Retirement accounts, investment portfolios, everything I'd saved, everything I'd built listed in precise legal language. Here's the elegant part, Keith explained as I signed page after page. The trust owns everything now, not you personally. You're the beneficiary and the trustee, which means you manage the assets and benefit from them. But legally, ownership has transferred to this entity, the Eleanor Whitfield Irrevocable Living Trust. I signed page 12. And that protects me from conservatorship. How? Because even if Victoria obtains a conservatorship order declaring you incompetent to manage your own affairs, she would gain control over you as a person. Your medical decisions may be where you live, but not over property the trust owns. She'd be guardian of Eleanor Whitfield, the individual. But Eleanor Whitfield, the individual, doesn't own anything anymore. The trust does. Rebecca handed me page 18. I initialed the margin. So even if she convinces a court I'm incompetent, she can't touch the cabin or my money. Exactly, Keith said. She'd have guardianship over your person, limited authority over your daily life. But your assets stay in the trust managed by the trustee you've designated, which is also you until you're deemed unable to serve. Then control passes automatically to your successor trustee. Julian, I said. Actually, I'd recommend against Julian as successor. He's married to Victoria, which creates legal complications, community property laws, potential claim of spousal authority. We need someone Victoria has zero legal connection to. Keith slid another page across the table. Your daughter, Clara Whitfield. Since she works in federal insurance fraud, she has no legal vulnerability. I thought of Clara, 28, sharp as a surgical blade, my daughter, who'd spent years in financial fraud auditing. Someone Victoria had never met and couldn't manipulate. Clara. I agreed and signed page 22, designating her as successor trustee. I signed 47 pages with the same precision I'd once used to sign off on security system blueprints. Each signature felt like welding another steel beam into place. Page 31, Trust Administration Procedures. Page 38, Beneficiary Designation. Page 44, Dissolution Protocols. Rebecca notarized each document with mechanical efficiency, her stamp making the same satisfying thump against paper that I associated with finality, legal proof, binding authority. One more thing, Keith said as I signed the final page. This trust is revocable, which means you can modify or dissolve it anytime you want as long as you're competent to do so. But the moment someone files a conservatorship petition, we freeze any changes. Otherwise, they could argue you're making desperate alterations under duress proof of declining judgment. So I can't modify the trust after Victoria files. You can, but it looks suspicious to courts. Better to have everything perfect now. He collected the signed pages, tapping them into alignment. As of this moment, you've transferred approximately $900,000 in total assets into a legal structure that survives conservatorship. Even if Victoria wins, even if she gets a court order declaring you incompetent, she controls your medical care and maybe where you live. But she can't sell your cabin, can't access your retirement accounts, can't liquidate anything to pay Eugene's debts. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling the weight of 47 signatures settle into certainty. She thought she was targeting an isolated elderly woman with valuable property and no protection. Instead, she's targeting a systems engineer who spent 35 years building fail-safes. Keith smiled. This is good work, Eleanor. Solid defensive architecture. Rebecca handed me a thumb drive. Complete copy of all executed documents. Keep this somewhere Victoria can't access. I closed my hand around the drive, feeling its weight. Every asset I owned protected by legal walls Victoria couldn't climb. The cabin I'd engineered with my own hands secured in a structure she couldn't dismantle, even with a court order. "What's next?" I asked. "Medical certification," Keith said. "3 independent physicians certifying you're cognitively sound, mentally competent, capable of complex reasoning. When Victoria files her petition claiming you're declining, we counter with professional proof she's lying. I'd recommend going out of state. Spokane has an excellent independent medical board, harder for Victoria to influence. I'll schedule it this week." Keith walked me to the door, shaking my hand with the satisfied grip of someone who'd just built something that would last. "You did the right thing. Most people wait until it's too late. You acted while you still had time to build proper defenses." I walked out of that office feeling untouchable. The living trust was perfect, an impenetrable legal structure protecting every dollar I'd saved, every asset I'd built. Keith Ashford had congratulated me on taking decisive action. I drove back up the mountain, feeling invincible for the first time since Victoria's threats began. I should have remembered that no fortress is useful if the enemy already knows its blueprints. Because Victoria had spyware monitoring my network. She had surveillance watching my property. She had access to every email Julian received, every document Julian reviewed, every legal recommendation Keith Ashford might copy Julian on for family transparency. I'd just built the perfect fortress, and I was about to discover she already knew exactly where every wall stood. I sat in the Spokane Medical Clinic waiting room 200 miles from Montana at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday in mid-August because I'd spent 35 years in cybersecurity and knew exactly how easily corrupt doctors could be bought. So I needed 3 doctors from 3 different states before Victoria could bribe even one. The Independent Medical Board Clinic occupied a nondescript office building near the Washington-Idaho border, deliberately positioned to serve patients from multiple states seeking neutral, unbribable evaluations. The receptionist looked up from her computer when I explained what I needed. 3 state competency certification, I said. 1 doctor from Washington, 1 from Idaho, 1 from Oregon. I need it documented that I'm mentally sound, cognitively intact, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. She didn't ask why. In her line of work, she'd probably seen dozens of people fighting conservatorship schemes. The evaluation took 7 hours. Blood pressure, reflexes, blood work sent to 3 different labs for independent analysis. A brain MRI at the imaging center. Next door, the results reviewed by a neurologist from Portland who'd driven up specifically for this assessment. Cognitive testing that felt like taking the SATs again, memory recall pattern recognition, problem solving under time pressure, judgment assessment through hypothetical scenarios. Dr. Sarah Brennan from Seattle conducted the final interview asking me to explain my professional background and current situation. I spent 35 years designing security systems, I said. Now I'm defending against someone trying to exploit conservatorship laws to steal property and cover debts. I need documentation proving I'm competent so courts can't dismiss my testimony as confused rambling. She made notes without judgment. And you chose a 3-state board because if they bribe 1 doctor, I have 2 more. If they challenge 1 state's licensing board, I have certifications from 2 others. I'm making it impossible for anyone to argue the evaluation was corrupted or biased. Dr. Brennan smiled slightly. You think like someone who spent a career anticipating security breaches. I think like someone who knows exactly how people cheat systems. And I know exactly how to make cheating impossible. At 2 p.m., all 3 doctors signed the certification. Official letterhead federal seal, typed in language designed to survive legal challenges. Eleanor Whitfield, age 62, evaluated August 15, 2024. Mentally competent, full cognitive function, no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment. Test results place patient in 94th percentile for cognitive function within her age demographic. Patient demonstrates exceptional memory, judgment, and problem-solving abilities. 3 signatures, 3 state medical licenses, 3 professional reputations staked on the accuracy of that assessment. I stored the original in a bank-safe deposit box in Spokane, neutral territory Victoria couldn't access. Then I created 3 encrypted digital copies and uploaded them to 3 separate secure servers, one in Seattle, one in Portland, one in Boise. Different states, different jurisdictions, different legal authorities required to subpoena them. 3 doctors, 3 states, 3 copies on 3 encrypted servers. 35 years of cybersecurity had taught me that the only evidence you could trust was evidence scattered too widely to destroy. I drove back to Montana feeling like I'd just installed the final firewall in a security system Victoria couldn't penetrate. Medical certification proving competency, living trust protecting assets, documentation of her family's fraud history, every defensive layer in place. The call from my daughter Clara came 9 days later early morning while I was drinking coffee on the cabin porch. "Mom," Clara said, her voice carrying the careful tension I recognized from her work at the Federal Insurance Office in Denver. 28 years old and already one of their best fraud auditors, Clara had inherited my instinct for noticing patterns that didn't match. "I need to ask you something. Did you recently apply for an accident insurance policy?" The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. "No, why?" "Because I'm looking at a policy number in our federal database right now. Issued 3 weeks ago, late July. Your social security number, your Whitefish address, your signature on the application. But the beneficiary designation isn't you or Julian. It's your daughter-in-law, Victoria." The porch went very quiet. Even the birds seemed to pause. "That's impossible," I said. "I never applied for any insurance policy." "I know. That's why I'm calling." Clara's voice shifted into the clipped precision she used when documenting fraud cases. "The signature looks perfect. Whoever forged it had access to your real signature for comparison. The application lists accurate medical information, recent addresses, even your retirement account details. Someone had comprehensive personal data. Victoria's June visit, the spyware she'd installed, access to every document on my network, every file I'd backed up to cloud storage, every piece of personal information stored digitally. What kind of policy, I asked? Accidental death and dismemberment. Federal underwriting, which means it bypasses state insurance regulations and pays out fast, usually within 30 days of filing a claim, with death certificate and incident report. Clara. My voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "How much?" A long pause. In the background, I heard computer keys clicking, Clara pulling up the full policy documentation. "I'm still verifying the exact amount," she said carefully. "But Mom, it's large." Clara said large in a very careful voice, the kind of voice you use when the number is too frightening to say out loud. "How large?" "Large enough that when I flagged it in our system, it automatically triggered a federal fraud alert. Large enough that 3 different supervisors have to sign off before payout. Large enough that—" She trailed off. "Large enough to kill," for I finished. "Yes." I set down my coffee cup with hands that wanted to shake, but didn't. Victoria had escalated. The conservatorship scheme was about stealing property, forcing me to surrender the cabin to pay Eugene's debts. But this was different. This was an accident insurance policy with my forged signature, and Victoria as beneficiary the payout, so massive Clara couldn't bring herself to speak the number over the phone. This wasn't property theft anymore. This was murder planning. "Can you send me the full policy documents?" I asked. "Already encrypted and uploading to your secure server. But Mom, if this policy exists, whoever took it out has already done the math. They know how much they'd collect if you died in an accident, and they know federal policies pay out fast. Which means the plan to collect it can't be far behind." "No," Clara said quietly. "It can't." Keith Ashford's voice on the phone at 8 a.m. Tuesday morning in early September carried the weight of bad news I'd been expecting. Victoria filed the formal conservatorship petition with Montana court yesterday, and you need to see the medical records she submitted. I was already at my laptop before he finished the sentence. "Send them." The email arrived 30 seconds later. I opened the PDF while Keith stayed on the line. "Medical records from Dr. Harrison Drake," Keith said. "Private psychiatric clinic in Denver. He's certifying you have signs of severe dementia in the early stages of Alzheimer's. Memory lapses, confusion, inability to manage complex systems safely. The whole package Victoria needs for her conservatorship claim. I scrolled through the document. Professional letterhead, board certification stamps, clinical language describing cognitive decline I'd never experienced. And on page 7, a brain MRI scan dated August 10th, 2024, with annotations highlighting regions of tissue deterioration characteristic of neurodegenerative disease. Keith, hold on. I pulled up my encrypted medical files, the ones I'd stored on 3 separate servers, specifically to prevent this kind of falsification. My actual MRI from Spokane dated August 15th. I opened both scans side by side on dual monitors. They didn't match. Not even close. The scan in Victoria's submission showed extensive white matter deterioration, ventricular enlargement, hippocampal atrophy, all the structural markers of advanced Alzheimer's. My actual scan from Spokane showed normal, age-appropriate brain structure with no signs of degeneration. Keith, I said slowly, the MRI results in Victoria's submission don't match any of my actual scans. This isn't my brain. This is someone else's patient who actually has dementia. A pause. You're certain? I'm looking at both scans right now. Different brain structure. Different patient ID numbers buried in the metadata. They forged my medical records and swapped in another patient's dementia diagnosis to make it look like mine. Keith's exhale sounded like someone confirming their worst suspicion. That's medical fraud, federal crime if it crosses state lines, which it did Denver doctor submitting to Montana court. Dr. Harrison Drake, I said, reading the signature line. Add him to the list. 4 days later, Clara called via secure video from her Denver federal office, her face filling my laptop screen with the focused intensity she wore when working fraud cases. I finished the metadata analysis on the insurance contract signature, she said without preamble. Mom, you need to see this. She shared her screen showing forensic software I'd never seen before, federal tools for analyzing digital document forgery. The insurance application with my supposedly forged signature appeared overlaid with technical data tracking, every pixel, every vector point, every digital artifact. The signature wasn't scanned from paper, Clara explained. It wasn't photographed. It was created digitally using vector reconstruction software. Meaning what? Meaning whoever made this had access to your original digital signature file, the one you used when signing electronic documents. She zoomed in on the metadata. Specifically, they extracted vector data from signature capture software you used approximately 5 years ago when working with Julian on business documents. They pulled your signature strokes from that old software, reconstructed them using professional forgery tools, and generated a new signature file that's technically genuine because it's built from your actual signature data. I felt the pieces assemble with cold precision. She didn't forge my signature, she reconstructed it from my own data. Exactly. And that's wire fraud at the federal level, unauthorized access to digital systems data theft, electronic signature falsification, interstate commerce fraud. This isn't some amateur scanning a signature off a check. This is sophisticated digital crime that required planning access and technical expertise. We looked at each other through the screen, both of us thinking the same thing. She's been planning this for months, I said, not acting out of sudden desperation. She married Julian, waited, gathered data, positioned herself, and then systematically built a multi-layered criminal scheme. Yes, Clara said quietly. And we just found enough digital evidence to report to the FBI. That night at 9 p.m., I called Keith Ashford and laid out the complete evidence package with the systematic precision of someone documenting a security breach. Federal wire fraud, digitally reconstructed signature on insurance policy, extracted from old software data. Forged medical records, brain MRI swapped from another patient to fabricate Alzheimer's diagnosis. Insurance fraud, massive accidental death policy with forged application and Victoria as beneficiary. Surveillance evidence, Mabel's photographs documenting Gavin Ross conducting reconnaissance on scheduled patterns. Financial records, Eugene's gambling debts, the federal debt guarantee Victoria signed without Julian's knowledge. Tristan's suspended insurance fraud investigation. Documented criminal network, Victoria, Eugene, Tristan, Harrison, Drake, Gavin, Ross, 5 people working coordinated fraud across state lines. Keith was silent for 5 full seconds. "This is no longer a family dispute," he finally said. "This is a federal criminal conspiracy. Wire fraud, medical fraud, insurance fraud, possibly attempted murder given the policy amount, and forged records. We call the FBI tonight." I stood at my kitchen window looking out at the Montana darkness, thinking about the geothermal system humming beneath my feet. 35 years of building systems that protect things, designing fail-safes that catch intruders, creating digital trails that expose attacks. Time to build one last trap. "I agree," I said, "but I want everything documented before we contact them. I want this case handed to the FBI so perfectly assembled they can move immediately." "How fast can you compile it?" "It's already compiled. 3 months of evidence gathering. Every document encrypted, every file, backed up, every piece of proof, stored on servers Victoria can't access or destroy." They had forged my medical records. They had forged my signature on an insurance policy. And I knew with cold certainty that neither of those things was the end game. They were just the preparation for whatever Victoria had planned next, the accident that would trigger the massive policy payout. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd targeted a systems engineer who spent her entire career anticipating attacks and building defenses criminals couldn't penetrate. And now I had documentation of every crime she'd committed, every conspirator she'd recruited, every piece of evidence prosecutors would need to put her away for decades. "Make the call," Keith said. I looked at the clock, 10:43 p.m. I dialed the FBI Missoula Field Office emergency line at 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The trap I'd been engineering for 3 months was finally ready to be sprung. At 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, I laid our entire dynamic evidence file onto the desk at the FBI Missoula Field Office. Everything depended on whether Special Agent Nadine Harrington saw the structural criminal network I had uncovered, or if I was still standing unprotected against Victoria's next move. The Missoula Field Office smelled like government coffee and industrial carpet. Special Agent Nadine Harrington, 40 years old, with the calm precision of someone who'd hunted white-collar criminals for 15 years, sat across from me and Keith Ashford, methodically examining each document I'd brought. She started with the insurance contract, read the policy amount without visible reaction, moved to Clara's forensic analysis of the digital signature metadata, the technical breakdown showing how Victoria had reconstructed my signature from old software data, rather than forging it traditionally. Vector reconstruction. Harrington said not a question. Sophisticated. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. "My daughter Clara works for federal insurance fraud," I explained. "She ran the analysis." Harrington made notes on a yellow legal pad, then moved to the medical records. Dr. Harrison Drake's certification of my supposed Alzheimer's diagnosis, the brain MRI showing severe dementia markers, and my encrypted files from Spokane showing the MRI in Victoria's submission belonged to a different patient entirely. "You stored your actual medical records on 3 separate encrypted servers," Harrington observed. "I spent 35 years in cybersecurity. I knew Victoria might try to falsify evidence. I made sure she couldn't destroy the truth." Harrington's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes, recognition, maybe respect. She moved through the rest of the evidence with increasing focus. Eugene Vance's gambling catastrophe and the federal debt guarantee Victoria had signed using Julian's company, Tristan Vance's 2021 Colorado insurance fraud investigation that had been suspended due to convenient evidence disappearance. Mabel Jenkins's surveillance photographs showing Gavin Ross watching my cabin from the eastern ridge on a scheduled pattern. 20 minutes of silence while Harrington reviewed everything. Keith sat beside me, equally quiet, letting the evidence speak. Finally, Harrington set down the last page and looked at me directly. Wire fraud, unauthorized digital signature reconstruction constitutes federal electronic fraud. Insurance fraud, false application with intent to collect on fraudulent death claim. Medical record falsification, submitting fabricated diagnosis to court proceedings. Criminal conspiracy, multiple parties working coordinated schemes across state lines. She paused. And possibly more depending on what the investigation uncovers. So you're opening an investigation. Ms. Whitfield, the digital evidence your system captured last night coordinates perfectly with what we already verified, Harrington said, addressing Keith. This is federal-grade evidence documentation. We're not just opening an investigation, we're prioritizing it. The agent said criminal conspiracy, like she was checking boxes on a prosecutor's list. I thought you have no idea how deep this goes. What happens next? Keith asked. We verify the evidence independently, subpoena Dr. Drake's patient records, pull the insurance company's original application files, cross-reference phone records, and financial transactions. If everything holds up the way I expect it will, we'll move to active investigation within 2 weeks. That means surveillance wiretaps if we can get warrants-coordinated evidence gathering across jurisdictions. How long before arrests? Depends on cooperation and what else we find. But based on what you've shown me, Harrington tapped the insurance contract. This is prosecution ready if the verification checks out. We're looking at months, not years. I felt the momentum shift like a physical weightlifting. 3 months of defensive preparation building, legal fortresses, encrypting evidence documenting crimes. Now the FBI was taking over the offense. Victoria had targeted what she thought was an isolated elderly woman with no protection. Instead, she'd attacked a systems engineer who knew exactly how to build a case that would survive federal prosecution. 1 week later in October, Mabel Jenkins knocked on my cabin door with a manila envelope that felt heavier than its paperweight suggested. I kept documenting, she said, settling into the porch chair. After you and that lawyer fellow visited the FBI, figured if they were building a case, they'd need as much evidence as possible. She pulled out 12 photographs. Not the original 3 she'd shown me in July, new ones taken over the past 3 weeks with methodical precision. Gavin Ross. Mabel said, laying them out in chronological order. Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings. Always 7:15 to 7:45 a.m. Always Eastern Ridge, same position within 10 yards. I documented dates, times, weather conditions, what he was wearing, which direction he approached from. I studied the photographs. Mabel had annotated each one in neat handwriting dates, timestamps, GPS coordinates, behavioral notes. He arrives from Forest Service road parks, half-mile south, approaches on foot to minimize vehicle noise. This is military-level reconnaissance documentation, I said. 20 years as an Army medic. We were trained to notice patterns, document observations, recognize when something didn't fit the environment. Mabel tapped the photos. This is professional surveillance, Eleanor. Whoever hired him paid for someone who knows how to watch without being obvious. The FBI is investigating Victoria's network. They'll want these. Already sent copies to that special agent Harrington through Keith Ashford. Mabel smiled slightly. She called me 2 days ago. Apparently my timeline matches phone records they pulled cash transactions between Victoria and Gavin Ross corresponding exactly with my documented surveillance dates. Mabel handed me 12 photographs and a handwritten schedule, more precise than anything my security cameras had captured. 30 years as an Army nurse had taught her to notice what others missed. Gavin Ross is officially a suspect in the federal conspiracy case, Mabel continued. Harrington said my documentation proves Victoria hired professional surveillance to map your routines. That's criminal conspiracy, interstate commerce, for criminal purposes, possible stalking charges. Victoria's network was being exposed one member at a time. Eugene's gambling debts, Tristan's fraud history, Dr. Harrison Drake's forged medical records. And now Gavin Ross's paid surveillance documented with military precision by a neighbor Victoria had never bothered to notice. But Harrington's words echoed in my mind, and possibly more. Because if Victoria had gone this far, forged signatures, falsified medical records, hired professional surveillance, taken out a massive insurance policy, what else was she planning that we hadn't discovered yet? My son's voice on the phone at 2 p.m. on a Thursday in October was barely above a whisper, the kind of whisper people use when they're hiding in their own home, afraid their spouse might hear what they're discovering. "Mom, I found something." I set down my coffee cup, hand suddenly steady in a way that only comes from expecting bad news. "What did you find?" A stack of mail in Victoria's home office, letters addressed to me from the bank, all unopened, all from 8 months ago, February, March, April. Business account statements, overdraft notices, loan documents I never saw. 8 months ago, exactly when Eugene's gambling debts started accelerating. Exactly when Victoria would have been assessing how much cash she could access through Julian's business before the federal debt guarantee came due. Where was she when you found them? At work, client meeting downtown. I was looking through the property tax records and found a folder in her desk drawer labeled J, mail hold. There are dozens of letters in there, Mom, all addressed to me, all opened and read by her. She's been intercepting my mail for months. My son was finally waking up, finally seeing the information control Victoria had engineered around him, and I had to make the most agonizing decision of this entire nightmare, how much to tell him without warning Victoria that the FBI was closing in. "Julian," I said carefully, "don't confront her yet." "What, Mom? She's been hiding my business correspondence." I know what it is, and I need you to trust me when I say don't confront her yet. Can you do that?" Silence on the line. I could hear him breathing, processing, trying to understand why his mother would ask him to ignore evidence of his wife's deception. "How long have you known?" His voice cracked. "About Victoria. About whatever she's doing." "How long?" "Long enough to protect you." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I can give you right now." I closed my eyes. "Julian, I'm asking you to trust me the way I've trusted you for 34 years. Put those letters back exactly where you found them. Don't let her know you've seen them. And give me 2 more weeks." 2 weeks for what? 2 weeks to make sure when you finally confront her she can't hurt you or Tommy ever again. Another long silence. Then, "Okay, 2 weeks. But Mom, whatever's happening, whatever you're not telling me, I'm not a child anymore. When this is over, I want the truth. When this is over," I promised, "you'll have everything." My son asked how long I'd known. I said long enough. What I didn't say was long enough to make sure she never hurts you again. 1 week later, Julian called again. This time, his voice wasn't whispered. It was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." My chest went cold. "What happened?" "Victoria knows about the trust. The living trust you set up with that lawyer. She found the notarized copy." "Where?" "In the mail. She goes through everything that comes to the house. I didn't think about it until now, but she always collects the mail before I get home. She must have intercepted something from the law office, or maybe the bank where you put the trust documents." I thought about Rebecca Morgan's notarization, Keith Ashford's office sending confirmation copies, the bank's safe deposit box paperwork. Any one of those could have generated mail to my Whitefish address that Victoria's surveillance network might have flagged. When did she find it? I don't know exactly. But yesterday she made a comment about how some people think they're so clever with their legal tricks. She was looking right at me when she said it, like she wanted me to know she knows something I don't. Victoria had discovered the living trust, which meant she now understood that her conservatorship scheme, even if successful, would only give her control over me as a person, not over my property. The cabin, the retirement accounts, the investments, all legally protected in a structure she couldn't touch, even with a court order declaring me incompetent. I'd built an impenetrable fortress around my assets, and Victoria had just discovered exactly where every wall stood, which meant she was now calculating the only path I couldn't block. "Julian," I said slowly, "I need you to do something for me. Tonight I want you to take Tommy and stay at a hotel. Use cash. Don't tell Victoria where you're going. Just say you need a father-son night." "Mom, you're scaring me." "Good. Be scared enough to protect my grandson. Can you do that?" Yes, but what's happening? 2 weeks, I interrupted. You promised me 2 weeks. I'm using them. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table looking at the geothermal dashboard, the system I'd built to make this cabin self-sufficient, untouchable mine. The legal fortress was perfect. Living trust protecting assets, medical certification proving competency, FBI investigation building criminal case. But Victoria wasn't stupid. She'd just learned that conservatorship was a dead end. The legal path to my property was blocked. Even if she convinced a court I was incompetent, even if she got guardianship authority over my medical decisions and living arrangements, the trust would keep every dollar out of her reach. She knew the cabin was untouchable now. She knew conservatorship wouldn't get her the property. And I knew, with the cold logic of an engineer, exactly what her next calculation would be. The $850,000 insurance policy didn't require conservatorship. It didn't require property control. It didn't require legal authority over anything except one thing: my death certificate. Accidental death, federal policy, pays out in 30 days. Victoria is beneficiary. I'd built the perfect legal fortress to protect my assets from theft. But fortresses only defend against one kind of attack. The insurance policy had a different trigger. Not legal proceedings, not court orders, not property transfer. Just death that looked accidental enough to satisfy an insurance investigator. And I'd just shown Victoria that murder was her only remaining path to the money she desperately needed before Eugene's 90-day debt deadline expired. Agent Harrington slid the insurance policy document across the FBI conference table at 10 a.m. on the last Tuesday of October, and the number printed under coverage amount made my hands go numb. $850,000, the exact price Victoria had decided my life was worth. The Missoula field office conference room felt smaller than it had during my first visit. Keith Ashford sat beside me silent, while Nadine Harrington walked us through the complete policy details with the methodical precision of someone building a prosecution case. Accident coverage, Harrington said. $850,000, issued through a brokerage that doesn't appear in standard insurance databases. We had to pull federal underwriting records to find it. The broker of record is Tristan Vance, operating what we're calling an underground insurance network that specializes in high-risk policies traditional companies won't touch. Tristan, Victoria's brother with the suspended fraud investigation from 2021. Of course he'd facilitated this. The application signature is the same vector-reconstructed forgery your daughter Clara identified, Harrington continued. But here's what confirms premeditation. The premiums aren't being paid from your son's joint account with Victoria. They're coming from Victoria's private account, a checking account Julian doesn't have access to. Keith leaned forward. She's hiding the payments from her own husband. Exactly. Which means she knows Julian would object if he discovered she'd taken out life insurance on his mother. She's concealing evidence of the policy from the person who should be most aware of it. Harrington tapped the document. This isn't opportunistic fraud. This is systematic planning. She forged the application, routed it through her brother's underground brokerage to avoid standard verification, and is personally funding premiums to keep it hidden. I looked at the number again. $850,000. More than double the cabin's value even with my custom engineering. More than my retirement accounts. More than any individual asset I owned. That's enough to cover Eugene's gambling debts and still have capital left over, I said quietly. Yes, our analysts estimate Eugene's total obligation after penalties and interest is approximately $600,000. This policy would clear that debt and leave her with $250,000 in liquid assets. Harrington met my eyes. She's not just stealing from you, Mrs. Whitfield. She's betting on your death. And she structured the payout to be worth more than any property she could access through conservatorship. $850,000, the price Victoria had placed on my life. I had spent 35 years calculating the value of systems, security protocols, fail-safes, redundancies. Now someone had calculated mine, and the number was printed in clinical black ink on federal insurance letterhead. When do you move to arrest? Keith asked. We're still gathering evidence on the conspiracy network. But Mrs. Whitfield, Harrington's voice shifted, became more direct. Based on everything we know, Victoria has discovered your living trust blocks the conservatorship path. That insurance policy is now her only avenue to the money she needs. We believe she's going to move soon, possibly very soon. How soon? Eugene's debt deadline is late November. We're in late October now. She has approximately 4 weeks before federal seizure begins on your son's business assets. If she's going to act, it will be within that window. 4 weeks. Maybe less. Time to finish what I'd started building the moment Clara told me about the forged policy. Before I tell you what I built in my cabin workshop, the trap that would either save my life or document my murder, I need you to comment A or B with a short reason A if you think I should have just let the FBI handle it, or B if you understand why I needed to engineer my own defense. The next part includes some technical details adapted for the story's impact, but the core truth remains: sometimes you have to build your own escape. If fictionalized engineering details aren't your preference, you can stop reading here. Early November, midnight to 3 a.m. Alone in my technical workshop with a geothermal systems control interface spread across 3 monitors and a blueprint I'd been refining for 2 weeks. The system I'd designed for peaceful retirement was about to become the most sophisticated trap I'd ever engineered. First, thermal cameras. Not the obvious security cameras Victoria would spot and disable, but invisible infrared sensors integrated into the wooden wall beams themselves. Powered by the geothermal system's electrical output recording to encrypted cloud storage capturing heat signatures through walls. Anyone moving through my cabin would be documented by technology they couldn't see. Second, ventilation separation. The geothermal system's original design had one main air circulation path. If someone shut it off, the cabin would slowly fill with carbon monoxide from the heating elements. I split it into 2 parallel paths: the visible main system Victoria would find and disable, and a hidden secondary backup that auto-activated the moment the primary path closed. Redundancy engineering, the same principle I'd used in data center security for 30 years. When Victoria shut off what she believed was my only ventilation, the backup would engage silently through pipes I'd routed behind false walls. She'd wait for carbon monoxide to do its work. I'd be breathing clean air the entire time. Third, cloud logging. Every valve change, every temperature adjustment, every system modification would be recorded automatically with timestamps and device fingerprints. If Victoria used her phone or a tablet to access the geothermal controls, the system would log the exact device, the exact time, the exact change made. Digital evidence that would survive even if she destroyed the physical equipment. I worked with the precision of someone who'd spent a career designing systems that couldn't fail, soldering connections, programming fail-safes, testing backup activation sequences, triple-checking that the hidden ventilation path was truly invisible from any angle Victoria might inspect. At 3 a.m. I finished and stood back to look at what I'd built. Not a house anymore, a trap. The most sophisticated one I'd ever designed, and the most personal. Victoria would come to my cabin believing she was executing a perfect murder, disabling my air supply, waiting for unconsciousness, documenting my tragic accident for insurance investigators. What she wouldn't know, every breath she took while waiting for me to die would be recorded by thermal cameras. Every valve she touched would log her digital fingerprint. Every minute she spent believing I was suffocating, I'd be alive and documenting her crime in real time. The cabin I'd built for peaceful retirement had become the arena where Victoria would destroy herself, attempting to destroy me. Victoria's face appeared on my laptop screen at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday in mid-November, with an expression I hadn't seen in months, warm, almost apologetic, and in her arms was my 2-year-old grandson, Tommy, waving his small hand and saying, "Hi, Grandma," in a voice that made my chest physically ache. I hadn't seen him in person since before Victoria's conservatorship scheme began. 5 months of manufactured distance of excuses about scheduling conflicts and travel complications of Victoria, controlling every point of contact between me and the grandson I'd held as a newborn. "Tommy, look, it's Grandma on the computer." Victoria's voice was honey-sweet performative in a way that set my engineering instincts on alert. Something was wrong with this call. "Can you wave to Grandma?" Tommy waved both hands, giggling. "Hi, Gamma, hi." "Hi, sweetheart." I managed keeping my voice steady even as my throat tried to close. "I miss you so much." "Tommy misses his grandma, too," Victoria said, still using that saccharine tone. "Don't you, baby. We were just talking about Grandma this morning. He asked when he could visit your cabin again. She was building something. I could hear it in the careful setup, the deliberate emphasis on visit and again. I'd love to have you both visit," I said carefully. "Anytime." Victoria's smile didn't waver, but her eyes shifted, calculation replacing warmth. She adjusted Tommy in her arms, positioning him closer to the camera. Of course, given the ongoing court proceedings, it might be some time before Tommy can make the trip to Montana. These legal situations are so complicated. It's hard to explain custody considerations to a 2-year-old you understand. Custody considerations. She just weaponized my grandson with 2 words that made her threat crystal clear: cooperate, or you'll never see him again. "I understand," I said, maintaining absolute outward calm, even as rage crystallized in my chest, like ice forming on deep water. "Legal matters can be complicated. I knew you'd understand." Victoria's voice dripped false sympathy. "You're always so reasonable, Eleanor. That's what I tell Julian. His mother is the most reasonable person I know." She was testing me, watching for any crack in my composure, any sign that her threat had landed the way she intended. "Give Tommy a kiss for me," I said. "Of course. Say bye to Grandma Tommy." "Bye, Gamma." His small voice, so innocent, so unaware he was being used as a weapon. The screen went black. I sat staring at the laptop for 10 minutes, not moving, barely breathing. She'd used my grandson like a weapon. And in that moment, I understood that everything I'd done, the living trust, the FBI investigation, the geothermal trap, wasn't about protecting property anymore. It was about making sure Tommy grew up knowing his grandmother had fought for him when it mattered most. That family meant protection, not exploitation. That love wasn't a tool for manipulation. Victoria had just shown me her cruelest move. What she didn't realize was that every weapon she deployed only made me more certain I was doing exactly what needed to be done. 4 days later, the FBI technical team arrived at my cabin in an unmarked van at 6 a.m. before Gavin Ross's usual surveillance window opened. Agent Harrington supervised while 2 technicians installed equipment so sophisticated I couldn't have designed it better myself. Hidden microphones integrated into smoke detector housings and light fixture bases, completely invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and had tools to disassemble them. Additional backup cameras positioned to cover angles my thermal system might miss, and a wire transmitter so small and precisely engineered it looked like a medical device. "You'll wear this under your shirt," Harrington explained, demonstrating the adhesive backing that would keep it positioned against my ribs. "Audio transmits to our vehicles in real time. Will be positioned in the northern forest approximately half a mile from your cabin, close enough to respond in under 2 minutes if needed." What if she searches me? The casing is designed to read as a medical monitor if scanned. Heart rate sensor, blood pressure tracking, believable for a woman your age, especially one she's trying to claim has health issues. They spent 3 hours testing every system, running scenarios, ensuring redundancy. By 9 a.m., my cabin was the most heavily monitored location in Montana. Harrington sat with me at the kitchen table, reviewing the bait dialogue one final time. "You'll call her Thursday morning," Harrington said. "Use the script we practiced, but make it natural. You're confused, you're struggling with the property systems, you need help from someone who understands the technical details." I recited it back. "Victoria, I don't know who else to call. My memory has been so bad lately. Julian is so busy with work. Would you be able to come up this weekend to help me with the property system passwords? I'm afraid I'll lose access to everything your father-in-law and I built." Perfect. Trembling voice, just enough confusion to sound credible. "You're vulnerable, isolated, exactly what she's been waiting for." Harrington paused. "You're certain she'll come alone? She can't let Julian know what she's planning. He's the one variable she can't fully control anymore. He's already finding evidence of her deceptions. If she brings him, he'll notice things don't match her story. She has to come alone. Harrington nodded slowly, then met my eyes with an expression I couldn't quite read. Are you ready for this, Mrs. Whitfield? Once you make that call, once she arrives, there's no going back. One of you walks away from this in handcuffs. The other walks away free. I looked around my cabin. Every wall contained sensors I'd engineered and equipment the FBI had installed. Every beam held cameras. Every breath of air would be monitored, recorded, preserved as evidence. The geothermal system hummed beneath us, dual ventilation paths, ready to save my life while documenting attempted murder. 35 years of building security systems. 35 years of designing fail-safes and redundancies. 35 years of making sure the important things stayed protected. Agent Harrington asked if I was ready. I looked around my cabin, every wall a sensor, every beam a camera, the air itself a witness. I've been ready for 35 years, I said. I practiced the tremor in my voice for 20 minutes before dialing Victoria's number. Thursday morning, letting my words crack just enough to sound desperate without tipping into theater. The FBI equipment was live. Agent Harrington and her team were monitoring from the northern forest half a mile from my cabin. The wire transmitter adhered to my ribs recorded every breath. I'd built elaborate technical traps, dual ventilation thermal cameras, cloud logging. But this moment required the oldest kind of engineering human deception. I dialed. 3 rings. Victoria answered with cautious warmth. Eleanor, this is a surprise. Victoria, I don't know who else to call. I let my voice waver exactly the way I'd practiced. My memory has been so bad lately. I can't access the property systems. The passwords James and I set up the consolidation framework. I'm afraid I'm going to lose access to everything we built. Silence on the line. I could almost hear her calculating. Why not call Julian? Her tone stayed careful. He knows your systems. Julian doesn't know the specific architectural modifications. He was away on that field project when James updated the system mainframe 10 years ago. You were the one who helped me organize the backup files that winter, Victoria. You always prided yourself on keeping track of our family records. Another pause. I was betting on her vanity, the idea that she possessed knowledge Julian didn't, and her belief that she had successfully mapped all my technical assets back then. I remember some of it, she said slowly, but that was years ago. I have the documentation here. I just need someone who understands the framework to walk me through the access protocols. Otherwise, I'm locked out of my own property management system. Everything James built. I let genuine emotion leak through. I can't let it disappear because my memory is failing. Victoria's voice shifted wariness, melting into something that sounded almost like satisfaction. I suppose I could drive up Saturday morning, if you really need help. She'd volunteered to come alone, not suggested bringing Julian, not proposed a video call to walk me through it remotely. She wanted to be there in person, alone with me in the cabin where she believed I was vulnerable and confused. Saturday would be perfect, I said. 10 o'clock, I'll have all the documents ready. 10 o'clock, I'll come alone. Julian has client meetings all weekend anyway. It'll be easier without distractions. Easier. The word choice told me everything. She'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Thank you, Victoria. You don't know what this means to me. Of course, Eleanor. That's what family is for. I hung up and sat motionless for 30 seconds, staring at the phone in my hand. Then I pulled out the burner phone the FBI had given me and texted the code phrase, "Package confirmed for Saturday delivery." Agent Harrington's response came in under 10 seconds. "Will be in position by 0600. My hands started shaking then, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of performance. I just convinced a woman planning to murder me that I was a confused, memory-failing victim who'd handed her the perfect opportunity. I walked to the kitchen, poured whiskey I had no intention of drinking, and stood at the window watching the December sun set over Whitefish Lake. The water was starting to freeze at the edges, ice forming in delicate patterns that would either solidify into something permanent or crack under pressure. By this time next week, the lake would either be fully frozen or the whole thing would have fractured open under the weight of what it was trying to hold. I knew which one I was. Friday night at 9 p.m., after I'd spent the day running final system checks and confirming every camera angle, I initiated a secure video call with Julian. Tommy was asleep. I'd waited until I knew my grandson wouldn't be on screen, wouldn't be weaponized again. Julian's face appeared and I saw worry before he even spoke. "Mom, what's wrong? I need you to promise me something." I kept my voice steady. "Don't come to the cabin this weekend. Keep Tommy in Denver. Stay there no matter what you hear." His expression shifted to alarm. "Is Victoria threatening you again, Mom, if she's—" "Not threatening, but Saturday. I'm settling something that should have been settled in 1990. Julian went very still. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to protect everything your father built, and I need to know you and Tommy are safe while I do it." "Let me drive up. Whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone." "I do." I met his eyes through the screen. "Julian, I need you safe. I need Tommy safe. I need to know you're both in Denver no matter what happens. Can you promise me that—" He was quiet for a long moment, reading subtext, the way only a son who'd grown up watching his mother solve impossible problems could read it. "What aren't you telling me?" "That I've spent the past year preparing to protect everything your father built, that I've documented everything, that by Sunday this will be over one way or another." "Are you safe?" His voice cracked. "By tomorrow night I will be." I saw James in Julian's face then, the same crease between his eyebrows when he was worried, the same way of going quiet instead of loud when he was afraid. James had gone quiet the week before he died. I hadn't understood it. Then hadn't known he was trying to tell me something was wrong, trying to warn me without alarming me. I understood everything now. "I love you," Julian said. "Whatever this is, whatever you're doing, I trust you. But I want you to know that if something happens, if you need me, I'm 3 hours away." "I know, and that's close enough." After the screen went dark, I sat in silence for 10 minutes, listening to my cabin's familiar sounds. The geothermal system's quiet hum, the wind against the windows, the subtle creak of beams settling. Then I walked to my desk and retrieved a sealed manila envelope I'd prepared 3 weeks ago, after Clara first told me about the forged insurance policy. My precise handwriting on the front, "For Julian only if." Inside was everything, copies of all evidence access codes to encrypted files, instructions for Clara and Keith Ashford, a letter explaining why I'd done what I'd done and how much I loved him and Tommy. Everything he'd need if Saturday went wrong. I placed it in the center of the kitchen counter where it couldn't be missed. Then I picked up the burner phone and texted Agent Harrington, "Final affairs in order. See you at dawn." Victoria's sedan appeared through the snowfall at 9:58 a.m. 2 minutes early, which told me everything about how eager she was. I watched from my kitchen window as she parked, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and arranged her face into practiced concern. The wire transmitter taped to my ribs was already live, transmitting to Agent Harrington and the FBI team positioned in the northern forest. Every word Victoria spoke from this moment forward would be recorded, preserved, weaponized. She knocked. I waited 5 seconds before opening the door, letting my hand tremble on the handle. "Eleanor." She pulled me into a hug that felt like being embraced by a predator. "You look exhausted. When did you last sleep through the night?" Her eyes were already scanning past me, cataloging the cabin's interior, with the assessment I'd seen during her June visit. But her first question wasn't about my health or the property systems. "Does Julian know I'm here?" she asked. "I tried calling him this morning, but it went straight to voicemail." She needed to confirm isolation, needed to know my son wouldn't interrupt whatever she'd planned. "Julian's at a client meeting all weekend," I said, repeating the lie she'd told me Thursday. I didn't want to bother him with technical problems. Something relaxed in Victoria's shoulders. "Good. I mean, good that you're letting him focus on work. He's been so stressed lately." I led her to the geothermal control panel, moving slowly, like someone whose memory was failing, whose confidence had eroded. "The system keeps alarming. I can't remember if this gauge should read 180 or 280. Everything in this cabin, I'm terrified I'll lose access because I can't remember the parameters." Victoria stepped closer to the dashboard, her fingers hovering over the touchscreen interface. Let me look at the manual override panel. I remember tracking these schematics when I went through your digital files during my summer visit. I watched her fingers probe the interface, searching. Not for the temperature settings I'd claimed to be confused about. Her eyes tracked across the screen looking for one specific control ventilation override. It took her less than 30 seconds to find it. Here, she said, tapping the icon that opened the ventilation control submenu. This is the air circulation system. You can adjust it manually if the automatic sensors malfunction. I leaned in, squinting like someone whose eyesight was failing. It's so complicated. Julian handles all our technical systems at home. I should have asked him to help me when I first installed this system. It's not that complicated once you understand the logic. Victoria's voice carried barely concealed satisfaction. The main ventilation valve controls airflow through the heating elements. If it closes, the system can't circulate properly. She was teaching me how the murder weapon worked, documenting her knowledge of the exact mechanism she planned to use. The wire transmitter captured every word. We spent the day pretending. Victoria asked careful questions about the property systems, about my memory problems, about whether I'd had medical evaluations recently. I played confusion, exhaustion, the vulnerability she'd been waiting to exploit. At 6 p.m., I ordered pizza because I claimed to be too tired to cook. We ate in careful silence. At 11 p.m., I excused myself to bed, clutching Victoria's arm like someone unsteady on her feet. Thank you for coming. I don't know what I'd do without family. That's what family is for, she said, and I wondered if she could hear the irony in her own words. I closed my bedroom door and lay down fully clothed on top of the blankets, the wire transmitter still taped to my ribs, breathing as quietly as possible. The cabin's familiar sounds surrounded me. The geothermal systems hum, the wind against windows, Victoria's footsteps in the living room. She crossed the room 3 times. I counted. 3 passes back and forth like someone gathering courage or confirming a plan. Then her footsteps stopped at the geothermal control panel. 11:28 p.m. The thermal cameras in my walls captured her silhouette, approaching the manual override cabinet, the physical valve system separate from the touchscreen interface, the mechanical backup that controlled ventilation at the source. I heard the cabinet door open, heard her breath catch slightly, the sound of someone about to commit an irrevocable act. Then the valve turning. 12 seconds of mechanical resistance as she shut off what she believed was my only air supply. The cloud server logged it instantly device fingerprint from her phone's Bluetooth connection to the control system timestamp, exact valve position, GPS coordinates. Every piece of digital evidence the FBI would need. Victoria whispered something I barely caught through the bedroom door. Just like the rental cabin in Tacoma. Accident. Tragic. Tacoma. Another victim. Another murder she'd gotten away with. The wire transmitted her confession to Agent Harrington and the federal prosecutors who would add it to charges that kept expanding with every word Victoria spoke. I felt the air quality monitor on my nightstand. The hidden secondary ventilation had activated exactly as I'd designed it, pulling clean air through pipes Victoria didn't know existed. I was breathing perfectly while she waited for carbon monoxide to do its work. Her footsteps approached my bedroom door, stopped outside. I heard the faint glow of her phone screen, saw light bleed under the door crack. 4 minutes, 22 seconds. That's how long she'd calculated it would take for carbon monoxide from the heating elements to render me unconscious in an enclosed room. She was running a timer counting down to the moment she'd check whether I was still breathing. I lay perfectly still, breathing the clean air from my hidden ventilation system, listening to Victoria wait outside my door for me to die. 3 minutes, 47, 48, 49. Each second stretched into eternity. I breathed slowly, quietly, wondering if the FBI would move too early or too late, if the trap I'd engineered so carefully would spring at exactly the right moment or collapse into chaos. 4 minutes, 10, 11. 12. Victoria shifted her weight outside the door. I heard fabric rustle as she pocketed her phone. 4 minutes, 22 seconds. The timer alarm made a soft chirp. Victoria reached for my bedroom door handle. Through my bedroom window, I saw 3 red laser dots appear on the living room wall, targeting sights from the FBI breach team positioned outside weapons trained on the woman about to open my door and discover her murder attempt had failed. The door opened without a sound and Victoria stepped into my bedroom, expecting to find a dying woman. I lay perfectly still in the darkness, controlling my breathing to the shallow rhythm of someone losing consciousness. The wire transmitter taped to my ribs captured every sound Victoria's footsteps approaching the bed. Her breathing slightly elevated from adrenaline, the rustle of fabric as she leaned closer to check if I was still alive. "Eleanor," she whispered. Soft at first, testing. "Can you hear me?" I didn't move, didn't respond. Let her believe the carbon monoxide had done its work. Victoria sat on the edge of my bed, her weight shifting the mattress. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, the fake warmth stripped away, leaving something cold and clinical. "I actually liked you, Eleanor. That's the strange part. You were always kind to me, even when Julian and I were first dating, and you had every reason to be suspicious of the girl who came from nothing trying to marry your son." She paused, maybe expecting a response that would never come from a dying woman. But then Dad's gambling got out of control. $62,000 in 8 months. Can you imagine? He kept saying he'd win it back, that the next hand would fix everything. Instead, he just kept digging deeper until Victoria signed that federal debt guarantee using Julian's company. I didn't know what else to do. Her confession poured out like she'd been holding it inside for months, needing to tell someone, even if that someone would be dead in minutes. The math was simple, really. Dad owed $62,000. Your life insurance policy was worth $850,000. Eugene showed me how to do it carbon monoxide in a rental cabin in Tacoma 2 years ago. His business partner who'd been threatening to expose the fraud. It worked perfectly. Ruled accidental death. Insurance paid out within 30 days. Tacoma. Another victim. Another murder she'd gotten away with. The wire captured every word, transmitted it to Agent Harrington and the federal prosecutors who would add homicide to the charges already stacking against her. Then Tristan forged your consolidation signature on the conservatorship documents, Harrison created the fake medical records, and Gavin watched to make sure you stayed isolated and vulnerable. We had it all planned, but you had to build that stupid living trust and block the legal path. Victoria's voice hardened with frustration. So this was the only option left. Make it look like your geothermal system malfunctioned. Carbon monoxide leak. Tragic accident. Insurance pays out. We clear Dad's debts. Life goes on. Julian never has to know his wife saved his business by eliminating his mother. I let her finish every sentence, every crime, every name. 35 years of rage compressed into absolute stillness, waiting for the confession that would damn them all. When she finally went quiet, I counted to 10. Then I opened my eyes. Victoria's face was inches from mine, and I watched the confusion bloom across her features as I sat upright and reached for the bedside lamp. Light flooded the room. How are you?" Victoria scrambled backward, her voice rising to panic. "You're supposed to be unconscious. The ventilation I shut off." "Ventilation has 2 pathways, Victoria." I kept my voice calm, measured the same tone I'd used presenting evidence to the FBI. "I built the second one 2 days ago while you were busy planning my death. When you shut off the main valve, the hidden backup activated automatically. I've been breathing clean air this entire time." I pointed to the smoke detector on my ceiling. "That's not just a smoke detector, it's a thermal camera, and the wire under my shirt has been recording everything you just confessed. The FBI heard your Tacoma admission. They heard you name Eugene Tristan Harrison Gavin. They heard you admit to murdering your father's business partner." Victoria's eyes went wild, darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for escape. You're supposed to be dying." "I'm an engineer, Victoria. I spent 35 years building systems that catch people who think they're smarter than the fail-safes." I stood steady on my feet, watching her realize the trap had closed completely. "You walked into a house that was designed to document your crime while keeping me alive." Victoria lunged for the bedroom door. She yanked it open and stopped cold. The living room blazed with tactical lights. Agent Nadine Harrington stood in the center of my cabin, flanked by 4 FBI agents in full tactical gear weapons trained on Victoria. Victoria Vance, FBI. Harrington's voice carried the weight of federal authority. You're under arrest for wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Victoria's legs gave out. An agent caught her before she hit the floor, turning her and cuffing her hands behind her back with practiced efficiency. Harrington touched her radio. Suspect 1 secured. Confirm suspects 2 through 4. The radio crackled. Ross in custody on the Eastern Trail. Denver team reports Vance and Drake in custody. All 4 down. 4 arrests. Simultaneous takedowns coordinated across 2 states. Victoria's entire network collapsing in the same moment she realized her murder attempt had been a federal sting operation. They led her outside into the falling snow. I stood in my doorway watching as the handcuffs clicked shut with the same metallic snap James's seatbelt had made the night he died. Victoria heard it as an ending, but I heard it as a beginning. The FBI vehicle's taillights disappeared into the snowstorm, carrying Victoria and Gavin Ross toward processing and federal detention. Somewhere in Denver, Tristan and Harrison were experiencing the same reality handcuffs, Miranda warnings, the cold understanding that their carefully planned fraud had been documented by someone who understood systems better than they'd understood the risk. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Julian, calling from Denver at 12:53 a.m. I looked at my kitchen counter where the sealed envelope labeled, "For Julian only if," still sat in the light. I wouldn't need it now. I'd survived. The trap had worked. Justice had been served with the precision of a well-engineered system. But my son was calling, and I had to tell him that his wife had just been arrested for trying to murder his mother. I swiped to answer. Julian's voice cracked the moment I answered. "Mom, I saw everything they made me watch." I was still standing in my cabin doorway watching the last FBI vehicle's taillights disappear into the snowstorm. "What do you mean they made you watch FBI Denver?" He was crying. I'd heard my son cry maybe 3 times in his adult life. "They called me 30 minutes before the arrest. Said it was witness protection protocol. They gave me a live feed from your cabin cameras." "Mom, I watched Victoria try to kill you. I watched her confession. I watched you lying there and I couldn't do anything. Couldn't warn you, couldn't drive up there. They said if I interfered, I'd compromise the federal case." I heard Tommy start crying in the background, a 2-year-old woken by his father's distress and frightened by sounds he didn't understand. "You had to watch the whole thing. Everything. From the moment she shut off the ventilation until the FBI arrested her. Tommy was asleep in my arms the whole time. I was holding my son while watching my wife try to murder my mother." His voice broke. "I didn't know you were doing this alone. I didn't know you'd installed that backup ventilation system by yourself. Mom, you could have died. I couldn't tell you. If you'd known, you would have tried to stop it. Or worse, Victoria would have sensed something was wrong." "I know, I understand now, but sitting there watching and not being able to help..." He stopped collecting himself. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't see what she was earlier, that I didn't protect you from her." "You weren't supposed to protect me, Julian. I was protecting you and Tommy. That's what mothers do." Tommy's crying grew louder. I heard Julian trying to soothe him, heard my grandson's frightened voice asking for his father. "I need you safe," I said. "I need Tommy safe. That was the only way I could do what needed doing. When can we come home?" Home. To Montana. Away from the Denver apartment where Victoria had controlled his finances and intercepted his mail and built a prison of information isolation around him. Tomorrow. Bring my grandson home to Montana tomorrow. I drove to Missoula the next morning through the same snow that had fallen during Victoria's arrest. The roads were already plowed, salt-spread systems functioning exactly as they should when someone maintains them properly. By the time I reached the FBI field office, the December sun had broken through clouds and turned everything crystalline. Agent Nadine Harrington met me in the conference room along with Agent Keith Ashford, the FBI's lead forensic evidence coordinator from Missoula, mid-40s, with a reputation for building airtight digital cases. He'd spent the night processing every piece of evidence my cabin's systems had generated. The conference table was covered in printouts, screenshots, technical diagrams. Mrs. Whitfield. Ashford gestured to the evidence spread before us. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen a civilian build a case this comprehensive. He pulled up the first document cloud server logs from my geothermal system. Timestamp shows the main ventilation valve was manually shut at 11:47 p.m. The system logged Victoria's tablet fingerprint through the Bluetooth connection she used to access the controls remotely. GPS coordinates, device ID, user profile, everything we need to prove she was the one who shut it off. Harrington added the next layer. The wire transmission captured 43 minutes of audio. Her confession about your father Eugene's gambling debts. Her admission about the Tacoma murder, that alone opens a cold case investigation in Washington state for another victim. Her detailed description of the conspiracy involving Tristan Harrison and Gavin. The thermal cameras. Ashford continued pulling up video stills. Captured her approaching the ventilation cabinet, opening it, turning the valve. We have 12 angles of documentation showing her exact movements. He laid out more evidence, Clara's wire fraud analysis, showing the reconstructed digital signature. Courthouse records documenting Eugene's gambling debts and the federal guarantee Victoria had signed. Mabel's surveillance photographs of Gavin Ross, each one time-stamped and annotated with military precision. And this, Harrington said, placing the final document on top. Victoria's own voice on the wire admitting she learned the carbon monoxide method from Eugene after he used it successfully in Tacoma. That's conspiracy to commit murder, admission of prior homicide, and evidence that could reopen a case we didn't even know existed. James used to say the difference between amateurs and engineers is documentation. Amateurs trust. Memory engineers trust logs. I'd built him a case file that would have made him proud. Ashford leaned back in his chair, studying me with something between admiration and disbelief. Ms. Whitfield, your client built us a better case than we could have built ourselves. Everything is documented, cross-referenced, preserved in multiple formats across multiple jurisdictions. The question I have is, why didn't you come to us a year ago when you first suspected Victoria? I thought about November 2023 when I'd first discovered the strange financial transactions, when Julian had mentioned Victoria handling all the books, when Mabel had first warned me about something watching from the ridge, because a year ago I didn't have proof, I said. I had grief over my husband's death 34 years earlier. I had suspicion. I had instinct. But systems don't run on grief. They run on evidence. So I spent a year building evidence that couldn't be dismissed, couldn't be explained away, couldn't be destroyed even if Victoria tried. Harrington and Ashford exchanged looks that told me they understood exactly what I meant. As I stood to leave, Harrington handed me a sealed envelope. Wire fraud indictment came through this morning. Trial's set for March. You'll need to testify. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Then I asked the question I'd been avoiding since the moment I'd watched Victoria being led away in handcuffs. What happens to Tommy if Tristan goes to prison? Judge Brennan didn't even need to read the full motion before he said the word I'd been waiting 35 years to hear dismissed. He looked at Victoria's attorney over his reading glasses, then back to the conservatorship petition that Harrison Drake had signed with such confidence 3 weeks earlier. Dismissed with prejudice. This court finds the petition was filed under false pretenses with fabricated medical evidence. Miss Whitfield, you're free to go. I stood in that Flathead County courtroom on the 9th of January and felt something I hadn't felt since before James died, completely, utterly vindicated. Judge Marcus Brennan, 61, with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent 40 years separating truth from manipulation, turned to the Montana Attorney General's representative. I'm forwarding Dr. Harrison Drake's testimony and medical records to the State Medical Board for immediate review. This was not a difference of medical opinion. This was fraud. The twist landed harder than Victoria's arrest. Dr. Harrison Drake lost his medical license by January 16th. The state board didn't just suspend him, they revoked everything. No appeals, no probationary period, no second chances. Victoria sat in the back row of the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, her bail denied after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. She didn't look at me when the judge spoke. She stared at her hands, those perfectly manicured nails now bare and bitten, and I wondered if she was thinking about the conservatorship papers she'd filed or the ventilation valve she'd shut. Both required the same calculation. Both failed. I walked out of that courthouse into January snow with Julian's voice on my phone. "Mom, we're coming home." He said it like that. Home, not a visit, not a trip. "Tommy keeps asking about the lake." I told him his grandmother has a whole forest to explore. When I asked, though I already knew. Julian had filed the divorce papers in November and Victoria didn't contest. "We'll be there by the 25th. He paused and I heard Tommy singing something in the background off-key and joyful. I need to be somewhere real, Mom. Somewhere that doesn't feel like I'm swimming through lies. The cabin was ready when they arrived. I'd aired out James's old study, moved the boxes of financial records Agent Ashford had copied back to the storage shed, and cleared out any trace of Victoria's presence from the guest rooms. Julian pulled into the driveway on January 25th in a silver Honda Pilot loaded with everything he owned, and Tommy burst out before the engine stopped. "Grandma..." He hit me like a small warm missile, all 2-year-old energy and strawberry blonde chaos. "Daddy says you have bears." "Not in the house," I said, catching him breathing in that little boy's smell of apple juice and adventure. "But we might see some in spring." Julian climbed out slower, thinner than I remembered, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there at Thanksgiving. 34 and starting over, carrying garbage bags full of clothes, and a son who didn't yet understand why Mommy wasn't coming. "Hey, Mom." He hugged me with Tommy between us, and I felt him shake once, just once, before he steadied. "Welcome home," I said. The late January light caught the snow on Whitefish Lake, turning everything silver and clean, and for the first time since James died, the cabin felt like it was supposed to full. We spent the afternoon unpacking. Tommy discovered the stone fireplace, the loft bedroom, the kitchen window that looked straight out at the frozen lake. Julian moved through rooms with careful attention, touching the carved banister I had restored the bookshelves we'd built together, the framed photo of all of us from recent year. "I forgot how solid this place feels," he said, "like it's been here forever." 112 years, I replied. "It'll be another 100 here." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That night, after Tommy fell asleep in the loft, surrounded by stuffed animals and new blankets, Julian found the envelope. I'd forgotten about it, forgotten I'd even written it. He came downstairs holding the cream-colored paper, my handwriting stark across the front. "For Julian only if." What is this? His voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, or recognition. I looked at that envelope at the words I'd written in November after Victoria's first threat, after I'd realized Eugene's money made her dangerous in ways I couldn't predict. Instructions, passwords, the truth about the insurance policy and why I'd increased it, evidence I'd hidden in 3 separate locations, everything Julian would need if her smothering plan had worked. "Were you prepared to die?" he asked. The question hung in the warm air between us, the fire crackling, the lake frozen outside. I thought about telling him the truth that yes, for about 3 days in November I'd been prepared, that I'd written that letter at 2 a.m. with shaking hands, imagining him reading it, imagining the cabin as ash, that I'd hidden copies of the financial records and Victoria's emails because I knew she was capable of exactly what she'd tried. But Tommy was asleep upstairs, safe and warm. Julian was here home, starting over in a place that had survived 4 generations of Whitfields. Victoria was in jail. The conspiracy was broken. "No," I said, taking the envelope from his hands. I was prepared to fight. I walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. The paper caught immediately, curling black at the edges, my handwriting disappearing into smoke and heat. Julian and I watched it burn together, neither of us speaking. And when it was gone, when there was nothing left but ash, he put his arm around my shoulders. "Good," he said, "because we're not done yet." The email arrived on a Tuesday in July with 5 names and 5 numbers that added up to 41 years. I opened it at the kitchen table while Tommy pushed toy cars across the living room floor, making engine noises that echoed off the cabin's stone fireplace. Julian was upstairs on a video call with his Denver consulting clients, his voice a low murmur through the floorboards. 6 months since we'd burned the envelope. 6 months since he'd said we weren't done yet. Now we were. Subject line: final verdicts. United States versus Vance et al. I read it twice before the numbers felt real. Victoria Vance, 18 years federal prison. Tristan Vance, 12 years. Harrison Drake, 8 years plus permanent medical license revocation. Gavin Ross, 3 years. Eugene Vance assets frozen pending restitution hearing. 41 years of consequences for 8 months of conspiracy. The math didn't balance, but justice rarely does. "Mom." Julian appeared in the doorway, laptop under his arm. "You okay?" "It's done," I said, turning the screen toward him. "All of it." He read, standing up, one hand braced on the doorframe. His face didn't change, no smile, no satisfaction, just the quiet acknowledgement of a system finally completing its cycle. "Gavin and Eugene?" he asked. 3 years. Assets frozen. I closed the laptop, the click loud in the summer stillness. Victoria gets out when she's 75. Tristan when he's 54. Harrison loses everything he built. "Good," Julian said, and nothing else. Tommy crashed 2 cars together with enthusiastic sound effects, oblivious to the verdict that had just secured his future. That was the point, I thought. He'd never have to know how close he'd come to losing everything grandmother inheritance safety. He'd grow up in this cabin thinking danger was bears in spring, not ants with ice in their veins. I never attended a single day of the trial. The prosecutor had asked, said my presence would strengthen the jury's sympathy, make the conspiracy feel more real. I'd declined. Given my deposition via video from this same kitchen table, answered questions for 4 hours while the lawyer in Missoula recorded every word and refused every request to appear in person. I wouldn't give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing me again, wouldn't let her measure whether 8 months of terror had left visible marks. The cabin had security cameras now. Julian had installed them in March. But I still woke up some nights feeling the phantom chill of that closed room, still checked the ventilation monitors twice before bed. Some scars don't show in depositions. July turned to August. Tommy grew a ½ inch and learned to say full sentences, his vocabulary expanding to include important concepts like excavator and backhoe and Gamma's house. He followed me everywhere, workshop to kitchen to dock, asking questions about everything he saw. One afternoon in mid-August, I found him standing in the basement workshop staring at the geothermal system control panel, its digital readout glowing green in the dim light. "What did Gamma?" He pointed at the temperature display, the flow meters, the efficiency graphs of the custom system I'd designed for this cabin. "That's the house keeping us warm," I said, kneeling beside him. "I built it to always take care of us." His eyes went wide, that toddler amazement at discovering adults make things. "You built it?" "I did. A long time ago, before you were born. Before your daddy was born, even." I touched the panel, the metal warm under my palm. "Your grandpa James helped me. We built it together so the house would always be safe. Years of hard work after James's passing, leading up to Victoria's conviction, longer than some marriages, shorter than some glaciers, exactly the right amount of time for a system to prove itself unbreakable. Tommy processed this information with the seriousness of someone who'd just learned his grandmother possessed superpowers. Then he grinned, wrapped both arms around my leg, and delivered the only review that ever mattered. "Good job, Gamma." That evening, the 3 of us sat on the porch, watching the sun drop behind the mountains. Julian had brought out a book, but hadn't opened it. Tommy had fallen asleep against his father's shoulder, one small hand curled in Julian's shirt. I held my coffee and listened to the lake, the forest, the quiet that had taken 8 months of calculated patience to secure. "You could have told me earlier," Julian said finally, his voice barely above a whisper so he wouldn't wake Tommy. "Before it got that dangerous." "You would have confronted her," I replied. "She would have run with Tommy. Eugene's money could have hidden them for years." He was quiet for a long moment, understanding settling over his features like the shadow of the mountains. "So you waited." "I'm an engineer," I said. "I don't release a system until it's ready, every variable accounted for, every failure point reinforced. You don't rush something this important." The Montana sunset turned the mountains the same copper color as the geothermal pipes in the basement, everything I'd built natural and engineered glowing the same warm light. Tommy stirred, mumbled something that sounded like Gamma's house, then settled back into sleep. I thought about the plaque I'd installed last week on the workshop wall beside the geothermal panel, brushed steel, laser engraved permanent. Built 1991 by James and Eleanor Whitfield, maintained 2024 by Eleanor Whitfield, protected forever. I'd added my own name to the legacy, claimed my place in the system. Some things you build with a partner, some things you maintain alone. All of them matter. These mountains have been patient for 10,000 years, I said, watching the light fade to purple and gold. I only needed 8 months. Some things are worth building slowly, especially the ones that last forever. Julian shifted Tommy to a more comfortable position, careful not to wake him, and reached over to squeeze my hand once. No words, just acknowledgement. Tommy mumbled again in his sleep. "Gamma built it," then went quiet, his breathing soft and even against Julian's chest. I watched my son hold my grandson on the porch. My husband built the cabin warm behind us with the system we'd engineered together, the forest dark and protective all around. Unbreakable. This is what unbreakable looks like. Every functional network demands relentless monitoring to survive internal vulnerabilities, and my family configuration was no exception to that operational rule. By treating malicious deception as a basic system flaw rather than an emotional crisis, I successfully engineered a definitive legal resolution that permanently neutralizes future threats. The calculated containment strategy didn't just penalize the rogue operators, it completely insulated our generational sanctuary from further structural interference. Standing firmly on this porch, I recognize that true security requires enduring blueprints, absolute patience, and unyielding defense mechanisms. Our legacy is finally secure, operating flawlessly under conditions I spent a lifetime mastering. And to you listening to my story, remember this. The people closest to you can sometimes pose the greatest danger. For years, I saw Victoria as family. I didn't want to believe my own daughter-in-law could wish me dead. When I first suspected something, part of me wanted to confront her immediately. But don't make my mistake of trusting blindly for decades. Pay attention to the small signs, the questions about your assets, the sudden interest in your health, the way someone positions themselves in your life. What I learned is this revenge isn't about acting in anger. Real, raw revenge comes from patience documentation and letting the system work. Some call it grandma revenge, the kind that's quiet, methodical, and absolutely unshakable. I spent 8 months building an airtight case, while Victoria thought she was winning. That's the difference between emotional retaliation and strategic justice. I believe God gave me the engineering mind to see patterns, to document evidence, to wait for the right moment. The raw revenge that matters isn't loud, it's thorough. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced family betrayal like this? What would you have done in my position? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Her Family Revenge for more stories about finding strength when family becomes the enemy. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: while this story includes some fictionalized details for storytelling purposes, the lessons about trust, patience, and protecting what you've built are very real. Take care of yourself and remember, Grandma revenge is always worth the wait.